Welcome, Wargamers, to the inverted underworlds of the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Nighthaunt, one of the most recent factions to get a new battle tome in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. Now, I already have a lore series for this faction up. I'm not going to take those down because, they're there for people if they want to watch them, but I wanted to redo a lot of the lore series now that I'm getting better and better at this, and so we're going to kick this off with a great discussion about the origins of the Nighthaunt, and then talk more about them as the week goes on. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or the Nighthaunt faction, the Nighthaunt are an incredibly interesting army in the Grand Alliance of Death. They generally serve as Nagash's vanguard, meaning the first wave of assault when Nagash wants to take over an area. And, on the surface level, that makes perfect sense right there. They tend to be very mobile, they can fly, they don't have to have any resupply or anything like that. There's no time in creating them like, say, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. And, it turns out being able to phase through walls is a really nice skill to have when you are the front lines of an assault. Now, if you want to see them battling in action, I highly recommend the book Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds. It's a great description. The last third of that book really shows you what it is like when a Nighthaunt army descends upon a city. We're going to talk about that more this week, but if you want a blow-by-blow visual of it, there's no better place. Now, that being said, they do have a very specific role in the forces of Nagash. They're not entirely defined by that, though, because there's a lot more going on. One of the reasons I love the Nighthaunt is because we were there when they were born. That is, the Necroquake. And we're going to talk all about their birth and their origins and that kind of stuff here in a second. And while it might just seem like the theme of the army is spectral ghosts and geists and all this kind of thing, I would posit that the true theme of Nighthaunt as a faction is punishment. Or, inversely, justice. Depends on whose eye you're looking from. From Nagash's perspective, it is justice in action. From everyone else, it is eternal damnation and punishment. But to explore the difference between just being ghosty boys and the idea of punishment/justice, we need to talk a little bit more about the foundational lore of the Nighthaunt, because the Necroquake didn't just make a new faction, it altered the concept of death in the mortal realms, and when people die is directly tied to how the Nighthaunt get reinforcements. So I've kind of broken this video down into three parts of, there's Shyish before Nagash and the Necroquake, there's what the Necroquake did, and what things are like now. So kicking off before Nagash has truly kind of consumed in Shyish, as it were, when a person would die in any realm, they would go down to the underworlds. Specifically their own underworld. So I'm going to pick on, real world religions because it gives us kind of a conceptual idea. But let's say, for example, that a Christian dies. They would either go to heaven or hell. Both of those underworlds take on reality within Shyish. It's a realm of pocket dimensions where everyone's afterlife is true. So if you are a Christian and you did some great sin and you believed you were going to hell, that's where you would go. Conversely, if you were righteous and thought you deserved to go to heaven, that's where you would go. If you were, a Viking warrior, you would go to Valhalla because it would become real. And so Shyish is sort of like a honeycomb of all these different afterlives of different belief structures, and they're just kind of swirling in mass together. When civilizations fade, like let's say, for example, there were no more Christians on the planet, so too would those pocket realms that they believed in begin to fade until they kind of just drifted off into pure oblivion. Now, it's important to note that sometimes these little pocket worlds would interact with one another, and you'd get some really weird crossovers, and that might be an easy thing to gloss over. When you're reading the battle tomes, in my opinion, sometimes the battle tome information can be a little bit dry, and so you'll read a line that's like, all afterlives are real in Shyish, and sometimes they overlap, right? And that's, you can look at that and be like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. But then when you really think about it, it gets real rough, real fast. Like, imagine you and your Free Guild Guard regiment come up over a hill, and you see Jesus fighting the Beast of Revelation. And from the right comes warriors of Valhalla pouring into the fracas looking for glory. And then the ground begins to shake, and up in the sky, it's the planet Kolob of the Mormons looming overhead like it's the new frickin' Bad Moon. And if that wasn't enough god-tier WrestleMania drama, Vishnu comes out of the side with a metal chair to the back of Jesus' head. And oh snap, Anubis has arrived and his boys are taking the party to the next level. Meanwhile, your Free Guild general next to you hands you a musket and a 4XL codpiece and says, "Tame this land in the name of Sigmar." And as much as I poke fun, it's a wild and diverse place. This is what I'm saying, is like, you think about how different the belief structures are that we are familiar with here on Earth, and you magnify that by the ridiculous, outlandish fantasy that exists in Age of Sigmar, you can easily see Shyish being a place of, intense, everything's just going off the rails. In addition to these afterlives being absolutely real, ghosts, of course, do exist in the setting, and sometimes they'll just drift around if they didn't have a particular belief structure or something like that. They just kind of move around as random wraiths, or maybe spirits will stir, near natural deposits of death magic, or places that great atrocities have happened, but that's really about it. For the most part, people die, they go to their respective afterlives, and then drift into oblivion. Now, regarding what Nagash and the Necroquake did, I've talked about it quite a bit on the channel, so if you want to learn more about that, there's tons of videos I have, one dedicated completely to the Necroquake. I'm going to stick to how it affected Shyish and the spirits there. Nagash goes and collects a whole bunch of black sand or grave sand from the edges of the realm and brings them to the center to build a grand black pyramid. This black pyramid inverts death magic, where it's normally concentrated on the rim of the realms, like all the other realms are. Instead, now the most concentrated point of death is in the dead center of it. So rather than, the realms or the continents rather drifting outward, now they're drifting inward, and it's almost consuming itself. Almost like it's a great maw just eating reality. When this happens, death magic booms to all realms and the dead begin to rise. Specifically, enough power goes out to raise masses and masses of what we would now call Nighthaunt and keep them active. A lot of times, spirits would erupt around sites of death magic, but if they got too far away, they would kind of dissipate as they lose that power. Well, Nagash put so much into the realms that they can now be self-sufficient. And the Battle Tome actually does a really good job of articulating just how dramatic event this was. It says there's billions of them. I mean, can you just imagine for every other faction in the game, right? Let's say not a death faction, but order, chaos, and destruction. If just a billion enemies spawned, right? Of course, it's not everyone has a billion enemies, it's collectively, but suddenly there can be an army at your doorstep where there was none before. Now, the Necroquake was supposed to be a one-shot win for Nagash, and thereby extension, all Death Faction, meaning Soulblight and all that kind of stuff, but the Skaven messed it up. Because they are the true saviors of the universe, and Nagash was supposed to have all these undead that he just rose under his direct command. Instead, they kind of mostly turn into these roving hordes that are just kind of mindless. However, the spell was more effective than I knew before, because part of that control was forming the Nighthaunt into a weapon that Nagash wanted, and he did succeed in that aspect of it. When they were raised the way that he wanted them to be, which is to say, they have a deep hatred for the living, a jealous rage against anyone who breathes, and they want to snuff out all life. Again, those were personality traits that he wanted. He just wanted more control, and he didn't get that. So seeing now that he has, a billion soldiers of an army that are spread all across the realms and kind of disunified, he elects a new Mortarch, Lady Olander, from the region of Dolorum, and I did a whole video dedicated to her, and her job realistically is to go around, collect as many Nighthaunt as you can, and bind them into an army. And so let's kind of move into what the world is like now, okay? So connecting 2 points that I made earlier. Nagash did succeed in making them the perfect weapon for his bidding. And secondly, this is a faction defined by punishment. Where most ghasts and ghouls and all that kind of stuff would appear as these formless ghosts, I guess my mental image is spirit hosts, that kind of model, where there's not a true form, they're just kind of these wisps that move around. These Nighthaunt, as we know them, are different. Nagash was able to manipulate the soul stuff of the dead to craft a weapon that demonstrates his power and his judgment. And this is absolutely reflected in the model range, and that's really why I think it is one of the most compelling armies to collect. So for example, someone who, let's say they were a criminal in life, and they yearned for death to escape their shackles in prison. Well, when they die, Nagash gives them a form where their afterlife is they're covered in even heavier chains, but now they have to use them as weapons. The same if you have your head inside of like the wooden stocks where your like hands would be like, you know, stuck upward. You'd be like a torture thing. You have to stand up there on your legs and people would mock you. As a chain rasp, many of those models have those exact same things, and they're bound to them for eternity when they thought that they were going to be escaping with their deaths. The afterlife that Nagash crafts for you is a reflection of your life and an eternal punishment for it. And this extends to, you know, if you were a nurse who tried to help people, he'll turn you into a Dreadblade harrow so that you just mindlessly kill and slaughter, but you see yourself doing it knowing that you want to help people. Like, again, they're just these very macabre and all kinds of nasty punishments. Nagash also then strips back any empathy and gets them all super mad about the living. Why? Because misery, quite literally, loves company in this instance. And so I'm going to end this video like I love ending all of them by simply asking, why is this cool? Right? Why would anyone care about the origins of the Nighthaunt? If this episode seemed a little light on direct facts about the Nighthaunt, that is intentional because their story isn't, you know, just about ghosts and stuff being ethereal and all that jazz. It's a story of one character and their will breaking the natural order of things and turning that brokenness into a weapon and a symbol. Ghosts existed before this, of course. We met a few actually in the Realmgate Wars. It was pretty cool. But Nagash broke Shyish when he did the Necroquake. And as a result, he also warped afterlives. He destroyed entire belief structures and heavens and hells. He ripped souls from paradise, he forged them into an army, asserted himself as the true judge, no matter what your personal tribe or culture's religious practices were. Now he is the judge. And the arrogance in that is unreal. Like, this is a faction that is defined by the arrogance of Nagash. And we'll discover with various units and heroes, these punishments range from, you know, eternal mental torture to some really weird esoteric stuff that's kind of messed up if you think too hard on it. All because Nagash personally needed control. And that's why I find them compelling, because they do have their own stories. You do have great characters like Lady Olander, Reikenor, the Craven King. It's full of character, but all of that is through the, we'll say, amethyst tinted glasses of Nagash. And I can't think of another army that defines one character's will quite as well. Maybe orcs with Gorka Morka, but I mean, like, Nagash crafted the forms of all of these Nighthaunt to be specific punishments that match these souls. That's like a next level of tinkering. And because of that, I find Nighthaunt to just have an amazing premise. It's an army that I don't really want to build and paint them, mainly because I think I would break them every 5 seconds. But conceptually, they are to me one of the most interesting armies because they do have that mix of character, and it's also dominated by one character's whims. So friends, tell me in the comments down below, what do you think of the Nighthaunt, their origin story, and do you agree that the faction is largely, you know, defined by Nagash's will? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Why do you love the Nighthaunt? Tell me, and we'll chat about it there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the tortured crypts of the mortal realms, because today we are talking all about the Nighthaunt in our ongoing discussion of one of the coolest factions in Age of Sigmar. So picking up from the last video in the series, we introduced the Nighthaunt and their origins in Shyish, that while ghosts did exist in the setting, it was the will of Nagash that inverted the realm of death and broke the natural cycle. It forged the dead into a personal weapon, and acting as a mighty army, but also establishing Nagash as the true judge of souls, at least in his mind. But as I mentioned in that video, there's a lot more going on than just an origin story, although that is largely a part of what defines them. Remember, Nagash's Necroquake only partially worked. He spawned the Nighthaunt, but he didn't have full control over them. So what he needs is a way to turn this, gaggle of undead into a true army, because they have work to do, right? He just raised them, they're all over the place, and they're just kind of everywhere, but he raised them for a purpose. Now, I did an entire video about Lady Olander, who's the Mortarch of Grief, the leader of the Nighthaunt, and her husband, the Craven King, which you can find a link to that video in the description down below. And she was installed as the Mortarch specifically to lead the Nighthaunt, but essentially Lady Olander had two tasks: bring all the wandering spirits together and master warfare with them. So collecting and implementing. Now, on that first note of bringing them together, as mentioned, the Nighthaunt sprung up all over the place, and they just immediately attacked the first living things that they saw. And this was a great, thing that was captured in Soul Wars when random ghosts just started popping up from graveyards and they couldn't figure out what was happening. And it didn't fully dawn until they saw the massive Nighthaunt army coming at them in that story. But that happened everywhere. There's actually a great little set of stories from the old Fireslayers Battle Tome, I think it was, the 2nd edition one, where they all got penned into their magma holds because just an army of ghosts just appeared at everyone's doorsteps. And that kind of put it into context for me of like, yeah, what happens if you drop 1 billion soldiers, even if they're not unified, into a setting, attacking the first things that they see? It's nuts. But to aid in bringing them together, one thing you might notice on a lot of Nighthaunt models, you'll see a lot of candles and lanterns and other sources of light, and these are essentially beacons to the undead to bring the spirits to themselves. As a Nighthaunt army arrives, the horizon will glow with all kinds of ethereal power, and any local graves or tombs or crypts may erupt as spirits are pulled towards these light sources. And so what this means for us is, as a Nighthaunt army is arriving to fight, let's say a Sigmar fortification, anyone who's dead in a graveyard inside the city will begin popping up. So now you have threats internally, knowing that the full army is coming outside your gates. Any ruins or sites of great massacres are a point of reinforcements, and of course, these exist all over the place because this game's not called Peacehammer. Every square acre is, an atrocity of some kind. How do you think, we get all those skulls on the bases? And so to organize her forces for war, Lady Olander formed the first processions, and processions is going to be an important word throughout this entire week because it's essentially their term for a Nighthaunt army or force. Kind of like a funeral procession is sort of a play on that. But a procession can be made of thousands and thousands of Nighthaunt and typically share some of the more similar peculiarities into how they fight. They're often led by a Knight of Shrouds, but the leader units in the army all retain some level of personal thought and independence, so they can design special forces to accomplish specific tasks if need be. And in my next video, we're going to go over the 4 processions that the Battle Tome gives us, and you'll see that some of them are designed to fulfill very specific roles. Of course, Lady Olander as the Mortarch of Grief can command any procession that she wants, so if you like that model, just grab her. And so in this way, she organized armies complete with war plans, leadership, and points of reinforcement along the path. Lady Olander is a true warlord if there ever was one. Because you divide the forces, you give them a command structure, so Knight of Shrouds, Banshee, all the different leader units, hero units I should say, and then you chart them a course. Hey, go attack this hold, and hey, along the way, here's a few notable points of battle and massacre sites so you can build your army up as it goes and kind of make a snowball. That is what it looks like to turn a horde into an army. But let's talk about how they are used once they arrive at a target. Because how the army fights, to me, is just as, if not more interesting, as to how it's formed. The Nighthaunt, I think more so than any other faction, maybe barring the Cruel Boys, use fear and terror tactics to the extreme. I think they're probably tied in that regard, but in terms of just pure dread, I think the Nighthaunts kind of inch out a bit. And the only thing that can stop them is a deep conviction or willpower. So this is the example I want to give. There's some notable story bits from Soul Wars, but essentially, let's say we have two soldiers with shields, okay? One of them, it gets super scared. The Nighthaunt comes at him and pierces straight through the shield because they're ethereal, they can go through stuff, and stabs the guy in the heart. The second dude says a huge, verbose prayer to Sigmar, and his faith is emboldened. He has strong willpower and character. When that same Nighthaunt hits his shield, it'll bounce off. And this is also how swords and stuff like that work. If you have conviction and willpower to push back that fear, you can fight a spirit. And so, knowing that that's their weakness, it is most effective for the Nighthaunt to sow fear and disunity into their prey, like before the main assault. And so this can include a lot of things. Sometimes death will send in like mortals, because there are humans who worship Nagash. They'll send him in as false messengers ahead to tell rumors of this unstoppable Nighthaunt army and basically sow fear and disunity from within the city, under the guise of giving a warning or a report. They could encircle the city with perpetual light, because remember, they're glowing all kinds of colors depending on what subfaction you do, and so you just never let your defenders have a night's rest because it's literally so bright. And you're just trying to wear down the defenders. That whole time, there's shrieks and wailing and other terrifying sounds, so nobody's sleeping. There's no trade coming in, so people get hungry. Whatever will demoralize, sadden, or intimidate their opponents gives them an edge, and it makes them more effective as a result. Because you're trying to break those people who have that resolute will. Let's see how resolute you are when all of your friends and stuff are dying of, starvation, dehydration, they're down because of fatigue, all these myriad of things. And keep in mind that those kinds of tactics might just be the advance action of the Nighthaunt. Because when the main army arrives, all hell breaks loose. Because this is Nagash's personal vanguard force. They move quickly, they fly over obstacles, they go through walls, they surge into towers by the hundreds, and they creep upward from underground at the exact same time. The way that it's described in Soul Wars, I love it. It's just described as this glowing tidal wave that is bent on snuffing out life, trapping souls and adding them to the army as they go. Like, the literal way it's described is like a wash of water just pouring over, but it's just spirits. And what makes them incredibly effective as a counterpoint to, say, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers is that when an area is all cleaned out and everyone's dead, they just move on. Like, they don't need to rest or resupply. The Ossiarch Bone Reapers, they can come collect some bones afterwards if they want, but they need time to build warriors because they do have a physical form. The Nighthaunt have no such issues. So when they work together, you can imagine they're pretty effective. The Nighthaunt go in, kill a bunch of people with no casualties to speak of, maybe a few ghosts banished, whatever, they're replaceable. And then the Ossiarch Bone Reapers follow up as the main, we'll call it the anvil of the faction, and collect all the bones and strengthen their army. So they work really well together, and we saw that represented in Wrath of the Everchosen, which I will wax poetically on a little bit later. A few last things I want to mention about Nighthaunt and how they go to war. I mentioned before that the conviction and willpower is enough to push back the Nighthaunt, and the book does clearly state they're magical creatures at their core. Like, they are animated by some kind of death magic, and so anti-magic measures are very effective against them. They also struggle to fight armies of destruction, specifically orcs, because once the Wa sufficiently empowers them, there's just no room for fear. Like, their brains just don't register being scared until that kind of power is drained from them. Now, that downside of, strong-willed characters being effective against you said, they are an incredible vanguard army. Like I said, and they fill that role very well, where the Soulblight Gravelords focus on the aristocracy with death, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are Nagash's main military arm, and the Flesh Eater Courts are just kind of off doing their own thing. The Nighthaunt serve the purpose of an awesome military role, mixed largely with self-sufficient demonstrations of Nagash's power and authority. And so I want to end this video like I end all of them, simply asking, why is this cool? And the truth is, it's just all awesome. The two stories to focus on, like I said, Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds is a Black Library novel. The final battle scene is incredible when the Nighthaunt finally assault, I believe it's Glimsforge is the name of the city. And the other one is Wrath of the Everchosen. Can't say enough about that one. It's my fave. I did a whole series on it. Essentially, it is the tag team match of Catacross of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers and Lady Olander. The scene where the Nighthaunt bursts through the All Gate leading into the 8 points is incredible because she like sends in thousands and thousands of all kinds of ghosts and spirits, and then 2 black coaches come barreling in and just crush through everything around them. It's a really cool scene. She also goes and hunts down some skirmishing forces, gets punked in the woods. Like, there's just a whole bunch of cool things that happen. It's a very dynamic story that pulls the Nighthaunt in a lot of different directions and shows them on the offensive, on the defensive, crushing, getting crushed. I like it. So if you're interested, I do recommend that campaign book. But one thing that both of those books drill home is that to see a Nighthaunt army attack is awe-striking. Thousands of spirits swirling, screaming at the top of their non-existent lungs, and just suffocating and engulfing their targets. Because the idea, the visual that we get from these things is that it is this unstoppable wave, and that's exactly the point. That show of power directly feeds into what makes them powerful by breaking the will of the defenders, right? They show this huge army and it's just swirling and it seems inescapable, which then breaks the spirit of the defenders, which then makes the Nighthaunt better at killing them. And that use of psychology is really, really awesome. It doesn't always feel that way on the table because psychology is a weird thing to try to represent other than a bravery stat on a table. But lore-wise, I think it's absolutely incredible. And so that's why I think these guys, whenever they're in a story and they are attacking something, it always just seems so epic because there's so many of them and they like suffocate a scene. I like it quite a bit. Tell me your thoughts. What do you think of Lady Olander, what she's forged the army into? Do you have a favorite procession? Because we're going to talk about them tomorrow. I'd love to hear it. So leave those in the comments. Don't forget to like the video to help out the algorithm gods that is Nagash. And I will catch you all in tomorrow's video. Thank you so much for listening, and happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers, to the Mortuary Science Field Trips of the Mortal Realms, because today we are talking all about the Nighthaunt processions. These are the sub-factions of the Nighthaunt army. And they give us, as gamers, a glimpse into just how far we can stretch our own personal lore and create some really cool, memorable characters. And so as a quick recap, we've spent the last 2 videos in the Nighthaunt series talking about the how and the why of Nighthaunt, from their origins in the Necroquake to how Lady Olander galvanized them into a vanguard army for Nagash that uses terror and despair as weapons, just as any sword or shield. But this is far from a cookie-cutter army. Every unit is a specifically designed punishment, and each procession, meaning subfaction, has a personality of sorts, dictated by their leadership. So things like how they fight and what units they have at their disposal. Because remember, Nighthaunt armies are constantly collecting more spirits and souls and adding them to their number. When the Necroquake happened, all these ghosties were born all across the realms. It says there's billions of them, and so they need to be collected and brought into an army. There's that. There's also the souls that they find along the way or of their defeated enemies that are pressed into service. And so in this video, we're going to cover the 4 big Nighthaunt processions that are in the book, and while some of them do specialize in certain kinds of units or tactics, keep in mind that any procession has access to any type of unit. So when I say that like a procession favors a certain type of unit, it does not mean that you are playing it wrong, quote unquote, if you don't bring one of those. Lore, in my opinion, is not meant to be restrictive, but to highlight what makes each procession unique. From there, you can do whatever you want. And so we'll kick it off with the Grieving Legion. These are sort of the poster boys and girls of the Nighthaunt. This is the personal procession of Lady Olander and Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King. There are more named characters, of course. This is the one, it seems like Games Workshop always puts all of the named characters into one subfaction. This would be the one. One interesting lore bit I did not expect about this was they were formerly known as the Legion of Grief, one of the biggest assemblages of Nighthaunt to exist when they first formed, and this was showcased in the book Forbidden Power, a campaign expansion that came out during 2nd edition. This is also the story where Lady Olander takes out the Celestant Prime by rusting him to death in real time. Essentially, this is like right after the Necroquake happened. Lady Olander is still in the process of turning these things into an army, and so she takes as many as she can muster and just makes a beeline for a storm vault that the Celestant Prime is going to be at, and makes a huge assault. This is actually the battle where they're trying to free the soul of Catacross to then go on and lead the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. But within the context of this story, Lady Olander just takes anything. Like, she just grabs anything in her, like, range of power and throws it at a storm vault. So it's not quite like an organized procession as we would know them now. But after that story, we fast forward a little bit, and we pick up with the Legion of Grief. And it seems as though Lady Olander has culled her forces and restructured them. Rather than being an endless mass of rabble that she could throw together on a whim, the procession now reflects the aristocratic nature of Dolorum, the home province of Lady Olander. So there's a lot more formality to it, a lot more structure and leadership and a court intrigue. In fact, they shuttered off any undead that the Soulblight Gravelords would use, and just kind of like differentiating themselves, right? They kind of have that same regal facade and order and command structure and stuff. They just do it in a more ghosty way. And when this restructuring was happening and it was taking on more of the face and the feel of Dolorum specifically, Lady Olander made big use of every jailer, executioner, and criminal in the cells of Dolorum. And I would kind of go out and say that her faction, right, the Grieving Legion, I feel really displays the punishment side of Nighthaunt more than any of the other ones, right? This is her curse and her weapon. She goes around, she sows terror and dismay into her enemies, and then breaks them as a result. This is all before endless waves of undead swarm in for the kill, and all of her, jailers and executioners are there specifically with the theme of administering righteous judgment upon every soul, which I think makes a good deal of sense. Because Lady Olander, if you watch that video, herself is defined by punishment for her deeds in life. And so it makes perfect sense that there would be sort of a little bit of a trickle-down vibe with her legion. Or rather, her procession. But I thought that was really cool. I never heard a follow-up to the Legion of Grief, and now it's like, well, it just kind of changed. It got a little bit more flavor, a little bit more lore, and boom, the Grieving Legion. Now, next up is the Emerald Host, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, this debuted first in a White Dwarf article. And the Emerald Host is super interesting. Regardless of where it first came up, that's where I first read it, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Essentially, it's Lady Olander's hitmen. The entire procession is highly specific to a single curse or hex that Lady Olander can place upon an enemy, known simply as the Emerald Curse. When she does this right, and it does take an immense amount of power to do, and she cannot do it constantly, she needs to recharge before she can, but when she does it, she'll mark a target, so let's say, Bill the Free Guild General. Well, when that happens, this procession is dispatched to kill that target. The victim, as a result of this curse, loses all color in their vision except to see the green glow of their pursuers. Like, they lose all color except for the Nighthaunt that are coming for them. They can see them. So it's this idea of, again, sowing fear, this expectation and anticipation of what's to come. Now, this procession that's dispatched, because they are Nighthaunt, because they are ethereal, they can ride for eternity. They do not need rest. They are fast as all get out. There is no wall that you can hide behind, nothing. They will get their target. And so it's just a matter of time. The actual procession is made up of very specific characters. In fact, they were all the household knights and royalty who sought to oust Lady Olander when she was alive. Again, there's a whole backstory there. She basically usurped power to control everything, and the aristocracy of Dolorum was like, how do we get rid of this chick? And she put a kibosh on that real fast. And the moment that Nagash granted her power and status by making her a Mortarch, she turned her enemies into her most dogged servants. Just as one more insult. So the curse dispatches what is essentially assassin knights. They favor anything that has speed, so you're going to see lots of Hex Wraiths, Dreadblade Harrows, Knight of Shrouds on steeds, that kind of thing. Anything that they can use to hunt, track, encircle, and eliminate the mark, and anyone defending them. And while we don't often think of, knights as being equivalent to assassins, when you're talking about the Nighthaunt, where they usually just throw tens of thousands of spirits and bodies at a thing, having a specific tiny force of cavalry to go eliminate single targets does make them more of an assassination tool than pretty much anything else in her toolbox. Now, fun fact, there is only one known survivor of this curse. It is Be'lakor, which is a pretty awesome thing. I think that all went down in the Broken Realms series, and he went toe-to-toe with Lady Olander. And while there's still some plot to be discovered there, he did manage to get out with his life for now. I just thought that was a cool thing to throw out. There's like one guy has resisted this, and of course it's like a demon of chaos. It's like, what are they going to do against Be'lakor? At least in their old battle tome, Be'lakor could go toe-to-toe with the entire army. Now the next one is known as the Scarlet Doom. This is one of the 2 brand new processions that we got, and man, I like them. Because to them, it's not about aesthetics, meaning like the regal look of the aristocracy of Dolorum, and it's not about a mission, like the Emerald Host is, where they have a specific job. Instead, the Scarlet Doom are united by their manner of death, or rather, what happened after they died. These are the spirits of those whose bodies were butchered, eaten, or offered up after they were dead. Basically, they were denied the death rights that many civilizations have, and their corpses were all desecrated. So all these heroes and innocents are burning for some kind of justice for what happened to them. At some point, a number of these souls pleaded with Nagash to let them assault their former aggressors. So we're talking serial killers, cannibals, all that kind of stuff, and Nagash was all too happy to oblige. It's like, wow, I thought I had to force you guys to do everything. You're super excited about killing these one set of dudes? Yeah, go for it. Way to show initiative. This is going to look really good on your employee reports. And so while they do still serve the function of being a Nighthaunt procession, they'll take orders from Lady Olander and they'll, attack specific points, go to certain locations to reinforce themselves, whatever. They have a personal vendetta, a secret mission on top of that, against any factions that defile corpses. And that's, of course, how they define defiling a corpse, which could have some variation to it. But right off the bat, you're talking chaos factions who will kill, slaughter, and butcher bodies, offer them to chaos, that kind of thing. I feel like Khorne is a very obvious one there as they take skulls for trophies. The Maw tribes eat people. Maybe even the Daughters of Cain, depending on how the blood rites and rituals go. The only faction that I kind of makes me tilt my head a little bit in confusion is like, how do they feel about Flesh Eater Courts? Because Flesh Eater Courts and Nighthaunt have worked together in the past, but at the time this procession didn't exist. Flesh Eater Courts eat people, but they don't think they're eating people, so it's just kind of this weird, I don't really know how that fits in. Maybe that's when we just kind of play by ear. Then again, in Forbidden Power, the Flesh Eater Courts were against the Nighthaunt, so I don't know. It's kind of a wash. If you have an idea, throw in the comments down below. But another thing that makes the Scarlet Doom unique is their appearance. I mean, firstly, their literal appearance, that they radiate a red glow, which is super metal, compared to the green or the soft blue that other processions will do, but also, literally how they appear. They don't come out of a realm gate, they're not just randomly walking around. Instead, their main method of approach when they're looking at an enemy is pools of blood. If there are, let's say there's a bloodbound having a ritual slaughter and feast because they make blood reavers be cannibals to enter into the entire bloodbound, thing. Well, any little patches of blood on the ground or tables or altars will just start to erupt as blade geists come pouring out of the center and into the direct center of whatever army that is. So you're all having a feast and enjoying yourselves, and all of a sudden there's a Nighthaunt army in your face. So this procession is the bane of murderers, defilers, cannibals, and I like it because it really does show that one time where Nagash is cool with letting people do whatever they want. He's like, oh, go ahead, freestyle it. Take care of this however you want. You just want to go murder people, a very specific kind? Thumbs up, bro. Usually it's all like, you do what I say and you don't get your own opinion, but I like that he was able to, throw a little flexibility in there, kind of meet them halfway. Compromises make the dream work. And lastly, the final procession is the Quicksilver Dead, and I have to say, from a lore perspective, this is my absolute favorite. If I was going to do a Nighthaunt army, this is what I'd be rocking. Because it turns out, we met these guys way back in the first, entry parts of Age of Sigmar, back in the Realm Gate Wars, the first, kind of story arc that we had as players. The Stormcast Eternals in Chamon were hunting the Chaos Sorcerer Efrix, and in kind of following his trail, they came to an abandoned city. This is before Nagash had risen back up and the Legions of Nagash book existed, and it was one of the few naturally occurring pockets of undead that we got to see. It was actually the first time we ever saw a Banshee in the Age of Sigmar. The Quicksilver Dead are led by Selimnus of Anvrok. Again, that's the Banshee I was mentioning. And essentially, this is a city that existed in the Age of Myth that Chaos came in and just completely dumpstered. I mean, they were tortured, they were cannibalized, subjugated, enslaved, all these terrible things. And so when the Stormcast then arrive in the Age of Sigmar, it's a barren, empty city, nothing but tumbleweeds and despair, and a Chaos army comes to meet the Stormcast. Well, at the same time, all of these ghosts and spirit hosts and banshees and all these things, they rise up and rebel against the Chaos armies that tortured and destroyed them so long ago. So in this way, we had a small lore story where the Stormcast were kind of like fist-bumping buddies of the Nighthaunt. Now, regarding the little bit of backstory that we do get on this particular city and faction, they used to make all kinds of cool things with their understanding of alchemy and metallurgy, all kinds of weapons and wonders of technology, because that's what Chamon was really about. Natural resources, minerals, gold, money, and innovation with technology. Their form, rather than being like the standard glowing blue or red of the Doom, is that of liquid metal. So they kind of have this white but shimmering metallic effect as they kind of drift around as spirits. They can change shape at will, so meaning if there was like a door that had a ward on it that would keep other Nighthaunt out, they can change their form to go like super slender and go underneath the door kind of a deal, rather than needing to phase through it. And this is a part of that alchemical thing where they don't have a true substance and they can manipulate that more than other Nighthaunt. But in their pain and their agony that's existed forever because of the massacre that happened to this city, they've flipped from being great creators, innovators of technology, to destroyers. We're going to use our knowledge of, science and all this kinds of stuff to undo everything that we find. They are the final remnants of an immense empire, and it was really cool for me to see, I don't know, I'm just a sucker for callbacks to the Realm Gate Wars. It's just my favorite thing. To me, it was the pinnacle of Age of Sigmar fantasy, where there was no off limits, everything was ridiculous and over the top. That's my kind of jam. I know it's not everybody's, but these little callbacks to the Realm of Metal, which I find to be highly interesting, just make me happy. I didn't see it coming, at all. I just thought that was a kind of a forgotten bit of lore. So with all of this said, let's talk about why these processions are so stinking cool. There's something to like about all of them, right? Whether it's the regal grandeur, having a specific task, a shared method of death, meaning the Scarlet Doom, all their guys got killed and butchered, or when they were alive, having a shared location. And I like that because it's easy for us as players, to kind of fit into a mold of one procession or the other, but keep in mind, the Battle Tome goes out of its way to say there are thousands of processions, and the way that this outlines the different ways that Nighthaunt can come together, it offers a lot of room for you and I to do the same. You could have an army that's all from the same specific place, just make up your own city. Or were they given a specific job? Obviously the Emerald Host is the assassins of Lady O, but there could absolutely be other tasks that need to be done. Create the task, and the army will follow. Just decide what unifies your Nighthaunt and what makes sense, and you're good to go. And that to me honestly is what subfactions should do. They're not meant to limit you and lock you in, but rather to showcase the different ways that an army can come together and different motivations. All 4 of these subfactions have different reasons for being together and doing what they do. In addition to that, I think it's a really neat mix of old and new because we have references to, I'm just going to rocket them off here, Forbidden Power with the Legion of Grief, the White Dwarf magazine of the Emerald Host, the Rumgate Wars, and one of the older General's handbooks also had references to the city around Anvarok where the Quicksilver dead were. And we have a brand new one, the Scarlet Doom. Rules-wise, I don't know, someone smarter than me is going to come along and tell you which of these is the quote-unquote best one, but in terms of a narrative spread for giving us as players motivation to create our own unique factions, I think it's top tier. And I would love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, my favorite lore-wise is the Quicksilver Dead. I would love to hear your thoughts. What is your favorite of the processions? There's not really a wrong answer because there's cool motivations for each and every one of them. I just want to hear what you get excited about. So leave that in the comments down below, and I will catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers, to the bloody wastes of the Mortal Realms, because today we are doing another dive into the Nighthaunt Battle Tome to have a cool story that involves some Coronate warbands, a whole bunch of Free Cities folks, as well as, of course, the Nighthaunt army themselves. This is one of those small isolated tales that comes from the timeline portion of the Nighthaunt Battle Tome. And these are wonderful windows into all of the various factions and how they interact throughout the Mortal Realms, because it is such a vast place and there are so many different competing motivations and goals and missions and objectives and all these other things. So we're going to read that story and then have a great discussion about it, and then ultimately ask the question, why is this cool? What does this add to Warhammer? Red Vengeance. The lands of Kuul's Ravage are stained by lakes of blood, split over the course of the Age of Chaos. Hundreds of thousands of souls have died there over the years, for it is a realm where the curse of Khorne runs hot. And yet, against all omens and warnings, the Dawnbringer Crusades, known as the Reclaimers, venture further and further south, fighting off small warbands of bloodbound every day for long weeks. In the process, they are whittled down to next to nothing, bled dry by the sheer scale of the ravage. Each night, they hear a strange, unsettling laughter, interspersed with screams and cries for help, that a brave few try to answer, only to find strange red phantoms, half visible under the light of Akshi's 3 moons. When the caravan makes a last stand against their blood-bound persecutors, blood runs thick across the site of the Brimstone massacres. At the peak of the battle, red-robed Geists rise in the thousands, using the shimmering pools of split gore as a portal to translocate from Shaishian underworlds. At first, the bloodbound cry in jubilation, thinking this visitation to be some Coronate demon, but their mistake is soon revealed. Over the course of the harrowing hour, the Nighthaunt slaughter all of the bloodbound before approaching the Dawnbringers in whispering parley. Ashen-faced, the Crusaders head back north to Fort Denst the very next morning. A lot of interesting little tidbits within this story. The first off is the actual setting. If you're not familiar or you weren't around when Age of Sigmar first started, the plains of Akshi, known as Kuul's Ravage, were actually a very prominent location way before Gur is now, and then of course Shyish, the Soul Wars before it. In the beginning, we were all about Akshi, Ghiran, and Chaman. But I think we can all agree, Chaman kind of got put on the shelf for a bit, and Ghiran and Akshi were really the center stage for most of the pivotal events in early Age of Sigmar history. Now, Kuul's Ravage, there's a whole backstory about the Realm of Fire and how it fell to Khorne and kind of the primordial angers and civilizations, some that were highly advanced, some that were very primal. That kind of governing structure all collapsed, and now it's just roving bands of murderers. In fact, it's called Kuul's Ravage because Korgus Kuul, the preeminent mighty lord of Khorne that we followed in the early Age of Sigmar setting, his clan conquered all of it, and he had a bloodbound army that was continental-sized. Like when those early books talk about the Stormcast initially dropping down to Azir to open the first gate, they're describing it as like this untenable horror. His territories take up the vast swath of what we as players know as being the Realm of Fire. Of course, it's just one continent, but of course, there's a whole lot more to the realm, but it's a huge section. So it's not unreasonable to think that the Dawnbringer Crusade we're following would have left from Hammerhall Akshi or one of its sort of satellite cities. Not just because it's in Akshi, but it's specifically in a very well-established and probably well-defended section of it. Now, here's a thought about the Dawnbringer Crusades. In the book Dominion by Darius Hinks, where we follow one of these crusades, their particular leader has like a vision from Sigmar, and she kind of leads them down this course. Now, I'm not sure it's been confirmed if every single Dawnbringer crusade has this divine inspiration kind of a course, but regardless, however they were managing this, they were told multiple times, you do not want to go into Kull's Ravage. Like, I don't know where you're being sent, but you don't want to go that way through it. And they're like, nope, God says south, we head south. And as expected, as they're traveling, when we think about a Chaos army, it's not just, Warhammer Total War teeming masses of tens of thousands of dudes that just rush forward. It's not necessarily like that. To conquer a region, sometimes it's just warbands that are kept in line by brutal tyrants that, have more and more power the higher up in rungs you go. And so they might only be taking on, 20, 30, maybe a couple hundred max bloodbound at any given time. And I would love to see like this caravan's moving defensive technique or structures or something, because you would have to plan for that. That's a real rapid deployment of troops and arms and everything. So I think it would be a really cool visual if there was a picture of this. And it does say that the whole time they're headed down south, things are getting weird. They start hearing whispers. There was this one little line in there that I didn't really quite click with me, is just that they would hear people calling for help. Some of the Free City people would go out there looking, and they would see like kind of apparitions, but nothing concrete, nothing to actually help. It was just like, huh, that's weird. And you know what, dude? It is weird. That's a weird thing. But there just becomes a point where we just don't have the manpower to keep moving forward while also defending ourselves, so that's where you get this last stand situation, which honestly, as we're talking about these awesome, 3-battle short stories, I mentioned this for the Arcane Cataclysm video, like it's almost like one of these battle tome stories blown up into missions. This is perfect, absolutely perfect for a small 2-player campaign. In fact, let me know in the comments, should I make one for Warcry? Because I am working on a Warcry packet right now for this kind of a thing. But mission 1 could be defending the wagons, Free City players, I say Free City, it's just order, right? Whatever you want, order. Going up the center strip as a caravan, and then bloodbound guys coming at it from the sides. And the next mission could be like the last stand, where now the Free Cities have a block in the center that's theirs, and now they're completely surrounded. And then the third mission represents the next part of our story, which is things get really, really rough. Now, in this part of Akshi, lakes of blood are not uncommon. It's just a thing that Korgus Kull does. He's reaping all them skulls and making all these tributaries for Khorne. And we've seen in early Age of Sigmar lore, specifically, The Gates of Azir, I think was one of the first books. It was a moment in that where a bloodletter comes up out of a pool of blood. So it's not crazy that when they start to see the blood start moving at the height of battle, for them to think, oh yeah, Khorne has blessed us by sending some of his personal warriors, the demons, to help us. If not help us, at least help, revel with us in all this slaughter. But instead, of course, it is the Nighthaunt. Now, it's not specifically said that these are the Scarlet Doom. However, that is how the Scarlet Doom are described. It means it could apply to a bunch of different Nighthaunt hosts, but really what this is, instead of using realm gates to travel, the Nighthaunt who have died the most heinous and slaughtered deaths, whose bodies have been defiled the way that Khorne warriors do by cannibalism, skull trophies, that kind of thing. These spirits now use puddles of blood to go through from different points of the realms. So arising from these lakes of blood instead of demons are Nighthaunt that are essentially the Scarlet Doom, but not given that name. And now at this point, the third mission in our little fictional thing could be the reversal, where there's a huge concentration of Nighthaunt and Free Cities in the center, and not nearly enough bloodbound to take them on. Again, these are skirmishing forces, and what we're describing with the Nighthaunt is like a standing army uses this as a gateway. And one touch I did like is that at the end, once all the slaughter is done, the Nighthaunt, instead of murdering our Dawnbringer Crusades, kind of just come in and parlay. It means they're just going to talk, they're just going to negotiate. Now, after that negotiation, Dawnbringer Crusade heads back north, meaning they're going home. And so here's my question, what did the Nighthaunt say? Because, and part of my brain really wants it to be like just a nice Midwestern kind of like, you know, it's a bit dangerous around here. You should probably head back north. You know, basically copy-paste the same warning that everyone's given them so far, except it took an army of undead breaching around their own dead bodies to figure out that that's probably a good idea. The other side could be the Nighthaunt saying, you know, if there is this Dawnbringer character at the top who's basically running the show, hey, your vision was to bring us here to unleash us to avenge our own deaths. Your prophecy is no longer needed. Go home, kind of a thing. I think that could be an equally compelling story, because it also brings to question a lot of the motivations behind Dawnbringer Crusades, like who is sending the visions? Does Sigmar have exclusive control over it? That would be a super cool idea, I think. Imagine if, I mean, not even thinking like forces of chaos necessarily, but just other deity level characters. If Gorka Morka could influence people to go on a Dawnbringer crusade because he wanted an army there for his band of ogres to eat, like he would give them a false reading. I don't know. This is all speculation. We don't actually know what the Nighthaunt guy said to him. Whatever it was, made him give up his, you know, half religious, part political crusade to establish a new place and go home, like everybody else said. The more important thing here that we can conclude, though, is that they were not hostile, which is interesting coming from the Soul Wars, where it just seemed like death just could not work with anyone except for Flesh Eater courts. That was kind of the caveat there. But Nighthaunt, just like, their battle tome reeks of like, they hate the living so much that you would think that they would just slaughter everybody. But things are complicated, you know? I mean, that's kind of what feeds into my idea that they planted the seed of getting this blood lake going, and that's why it was a false vision, because they didn't kill them. You did what we wanted you to do. I don't know. Again, it's just a theory. I'm going to lay off it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Did the Nighthaunt or Nagash or somebody seed the idea for this Dawnbringer crusade to bring them here to unleash these ghosts? That's my theory, because it has a lot of implications if yes. Also, one thing I want to point out is that the fort that they turn backwards towards is called Fort Denst, and the Van Denst is a very prominent family in Age of Sigmar lore from the Broken Realm series. That's the father and daughter duo who are Soulblight vampire hunters. Interesting that the named fort is here rather than Gur when his notable deeds that we know of were accomplished. Or it could be the other way around, right? Denst could have been a long family name, and then this fort existed in Akshi, and then they just happened to end up in Gur carrying the title, but it was an interesting, you know, connection nonetheless. And so backing out of it, why is this story so cool, right? This is my favorite part of all these videos. Instead of just going over the actual story beats, kind of contextualizing it a bit within the setting. Quite simply, I love when factions interact. Anytime one of these little stories has more than two armies in it, like mentioned, I get really excited, because in this case we have Nighthaunt, Bloodbound, or Khorne, Blades of Khorne is the army, and a Dawnbringer crusade, Cities of Sigmar. And that whole discussion we just had about, you know, did the Nighthaunt seed the thought or the vision to come release them? All of those things are possible, and they do happen within the Age of Sigmar universe. That these very intricate plans where everyone is trying to play a long con to get someone into a vulnerable position to be able to attack them or use them, like all those things are happening simultaneously. Whether it's Neferata manipulating nation states to get, you know, human cattle or whatever she needs for her vampires. Whether it's the Bad Moon arriving at just the right location at the right time for the wrong city kind of a deal. Like all these little plans and machinations are all happening in different ways. And so this is a situation where the Nighthaunt wanted to kill the Khorne warriors, but did not want to kill the Free City people. And I'm like, that is a very interesting relationship to highlight. It's very easy to look at all the various armies and think that they're all very much out for themselves and that everyone else is an enemy, and to some extent that's generally true, especially with chaos stuff. But it's those interactions between armies where they have respect for one another, or just are able to have some kind of dialogue that where it's like, this is so interesting because they're approaching these conversations in such various ways that always makes for the best storytelling, in my opinion. The fact that we can have a conversation and debate what the Nighthaunt guy said to him and the reasons why and the evidence for, like, that's interesting. It adds vibrancy to the setting, and that's just not a bad thing. But anyway, friends, those are my thoughts on the Red Vengeance. Again, not officially name dropped as the Scarlet Doom, but they do the Scarlet Doom trick of coming up through blood puddles, which, let's be honest, is pretty baller. You'd think they'd spend a lot of time in Akshi. Let me know your thoughts on my theory regarding the Dawnbringer Crusades prophecy vision, why they got there, and what the conversation was about that sent them politely excusing themselves and going home through Kull's Ravage. I'd love to see your thoughts down below. I will read them back. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the mineral-rich graveyards of the mortal realms, because today we are traveling over to the realm of metal, Chamon, to talk about a very special sub-faction that exists within the Nighthaunt. No one in particular asked for this, but it's a faction that I think is really cool because it highlights some of my favorite moments in the opening saga of Age of Sigmar, and so we're going to talk about the Quicksilver Dead. That's right, we're getting spooky up in here. So if you're not familiar with Age of Sigmar very much, this is from the Nighthaunt Battle Tome. It's any Nighthaunt can be anything. You can kind of do whatever you want army-wise, but they have specific sub-factions for each army that kind of highlight a cool story arc that exists within the greater setting. So in this video, we're going to highlight their story with a little bit of a kind of an exemplary battle from their history, and it is quite exemplary, and then we're going to move into talking about the finer details of the Quicksilver Dead, and then, of course, ending this video like I end all others with a discussion on why is this cool. Those of you who are brand new to Age of Sigmar, and you maybe got in the 3rd edition when now it's Stormcast versus the Auric War Clans as the starter set, you might not know about the Nighthaunt. Well, buckle up. I'm going to give you a very brief overview, and then we're going to move into talking about our specific subfaction. The Nighthaunt are the restless undead spirits, geists, all those kinds of things that exist all across from the multitude of wars that have gone on across the Warhammer universe. Now, normally, when a spirit dies, if they're died in particular agony or something like that, they might haunt the local area, and if a wisp of death magic gets into the area and it's strong enough, a few of them can stir and become geists and just kind of haunt people, but they're very aimless about it. They don't have much of a sense of self. And that was until Nagash came back onto the scene and the events of the Soul Wars began to happen, in which basically, I'm not going to go into full detail about that, but he rose a whole bunch of undead, meaning the spirits everywhere. A Nighthaunt became a full army at that point that was playable for us in the real world, and the idea was that he rose a whole bunch of them and galvanized them into a force. However, it's important to note for our purposes today that Nighthaunt exists outside of Nagash. This is a naturally occurring thing, and it just stands out because, like, for Nagash, so much of what he does is taking a natural thing, meaning death, and putting it to incredibly unnatural proportions, right? Death magnified. Ossiarch Bone Reapers are conglomerations of thousands of dead people just jammed together in an army that's meant to spread death. The Nighthaunt, however, are a naturally occurring thing. Some places in this fantasy universe are just haunted. Spirits of ancestors can come to help and hinder. All kinds of cool stuff. So, like, it's kind of a baseline that they already existed and were known about, but it was when Nagash did his big Soul Wars opening spell, resulting in the Necroquake, that's when things went, like, and turned them up to 11. And the reason I stress all of that is because for newer players, when you see, like, this video is about a Nighthaunt subfaction, it's easy to associate them with the Nighthaunt that you and I know now. But in the beginning, when Age of Sigmar first launched, the Nighthaunt as a faction didn't exist. In fact, the first real death faction ever even encountered in the Age of Sigmar was with the Quicksilver Dead, who is, of course, the subfaction we'll be talking about. Now, this event happened in the opening acts of Age of Sigmar, often called the Realm Gate Wars. That's kind of like the overall, I guess, campaign arc that we were going through. There was a collection of 4 huge campaign books with all kinds of missions and lore and all these kinds of neat details. And in that story, I believe it was the Celestial Vindicators, were sent down to the realm of metal, Chamon, to find any dwarves that they could. They were on a scouting mission. On this journey, they run into a Chaos Fortress. By that I mean it's a Tzeentchian Chaos Sorcerer in this huge fortress that's really cool because every time a Stormcast dies near it, it sucks in the lightning that is their soul and, like, it goes into a giant battery. That fight doesn't go so well for the Sorcerer, and so he does the evil villain thing of running away. Well, the place that he runs away from is right near a city called Elixia. This is, of course, still in the realm of metal. He didn't go realm to realm or whatever. It's not terribly far away from the site of the first battle, and it's known in an area called the Hanging Gardens of Anvrock. Very cool. This is when Age of Sigmar was really out there fantasy-wise. I loved this stuff. And so now the Stormcast army having realized that what the Tzeentchian Lord was hiding this whole time was Gal Maraz, Sigmar's hammer. Now they're like, okay, well, we got wiped out, but we're going to go right back in, get that hammer. That's now a priority. Forget the dwarves. We're going to figure that out later. If you're curious as to the details of this story, I actually do have an entire Realmgate Wars campaign series. I will put the link to that in the description down below, so please go check it out. It's a very cool story. I'm in sum up mode. And to do an even better job, we're going to move into the exemplary battle for the Quicksilver Dead by reading it straight out of the Nighthaunt battle tome called The Alliance of Anvrok. During the Stormcast strike at the chaos-occupied hanging valleys of Anvrok, the ill-fated Thostos Bladestorm matches his might against the sorcerer Efrix, the Tzeentchian Magister who prosecuted the city of Elixia and in doing so ended the life of the gifted swordmaker Solemnis. Shortly before being slain by a sorcerous explosion, Thostos spies the light of the hammer Gal Maraz, that holy relic that came to rest in Elixia after the Battle of the Burning Skies. Reforged and later sent back alongside Lord Vandus and Ionis Cryptorn at the head of the Heldenhammer Crusade, Thostos is soon locked in battle against the forces of chaos once more. It is the ghost of the weaponsmith Solemnis, remade as a banshee, that tips the balance. By summoning forth a host of Quicksilver Dead and a veritable arsenal of flying Solemnite blades, she fights alongside Ionis Cryptorn and his warriors to drive out the Tzeentchians from Elixia. It is this alliance that sees Gal Maraz reclaimed and returned to the hand of Sigmar, turning the tide of the Realmgate Wars, though at a cost. Since that day, Elixia has been ruled only by vengeful, shimmer-skinned Geists. So a couple things we learn here that build on top of the basics that I already laid out. Interesting to note that this then explains Elixia was never colonized. It was a full city that existed. I mean, it was ruined, it was wrecked, but it could have been rebuilt into a city of Sigmar, which I think would have made a lot of sense. However, they were just like, nope, let the dead have it. As I mentioned before, they are an appearance of Nighthaunt as a cohesive force before Nagash even woke up, which is really cool. This is technically the OG army. And now moving from their exemplary battle, we can go to their actual lore section later on in the book and kind of just pick out a few details that are kind of really unique and interesting and just kind of add more flavor. Unlike other Nighthaunt who are ethereal in nature, there's the Scarlet Doom. They are ethereal, but they come out of blood. But like, that's how they get there. Once they're out of the blood, they take on an ethereal aspect and they function just like other Nighthaunt. This means other Nighthaunt can go through walls or pierce any shield as long as like the opponent's will is not strong enough to pierce, or stop the blade. But what makes the Quicksilver Dead unique is that they have substance. They are not truly ethereal. They might as well be, but instead of like a vapor or a gas kind of a thing, instead think of like liquid mercury, or the T1000 from Terminator 2, where you can kind of pool into a liquid. And so like they functionally are the same. A door won't stop them. Regular Nighthaunt will go through it. The Quicksilver Dead will just pool around it unless it's airtight. And they're just infused with all kinds of specifically realm magic. The magic of metal, Chaman. Now, what we also learn in this little lore segment here is that Nagash gives them free reign, which is a very interesting concept for his character. Because yes, I said that they are a faction that existed before Nagash, but lots of things existed before Nagash woke back up in the Age of Sigmar. I'm talking about like the fact that he lets them do whatever they want is very unusual for his very neurotic character. He takes in other armies as he goes. Other vampire dynasties, he can just kind of snatch them up and kind of bring them into his greater, I guess you could say, war machine. But the idea of leaving a place alone seems very not Nagashi. And I think it's for two very good reasons. One, they're already miserable. Like, Nagash's thing is putting himself in the judge's seat to be like, you deserve all these terrible things, I'm going to make you a chain rasp for all eternity, that kind of deal. But the Chaos armies that came through here in the Age of Chaos did these people of Elixia dirty, okay? Like, I think they're already in enough eternal punishment that Nagash is like, oh, jeez, you know what, you're doing good, you're fine. This seems sufficient. That lady who we talked about before, Solemnis, she is the town's blacksmith, basically put Elixia on the map as a super city because she was such a great craftsman of weapons. To give you a sense of how they treated the people here when it was ransacked by chaos, they boiled her alive in her own cauldron, like the forge cauldron, where they kind of like turn metal into liquid, which seems like a bad idea in the realm of metal. It seems like that's so ironic that it would just like, you know, spout forth an entire army of undead liquid metal ghosts. The point is I'm getting at is that the people here were already so angry and incensed and in pain that maybe Nagash didn't see the need to take over and like inflict more punishment. Because like that they're already doing what I would do to them anyway. But the second thing is this, right? There's a few ideas that I have here where the people of Anvarok, meaning the Quicksilver Dead in general, that whole region that they kind of dominate. One, it's good to just have someone who can act as a middleman. Like maybe Nagash doesn't want to take control because if he ever needs to parlay, there's at least one stable place that is not actively on a massive crusade to kill everybody. That's kind of nice to have. But also, if he has no specific plans for Chamon in general, why stir that pot too, right? They already staked out a claim. No one goes near the city. It belongs to the dead. Everyone understands that, even Sigmar. So that's good? Okay, cool, thumbs up. We're just going to let that sit. We're going to focus elsewhere. And he has. I mean, of course, Nagash has been everywhere, from trying to attack the 8 points with Catacross. He's marching in Gur with I think it's the Ivory Host. He's got Nighthaunt campaigns going out. Like he's already in a lot of fronts, so if he has a stable place that's already marking their own territory, he's like, fine. Whatever the reason, though, it does make them extremely unique when you compare them to the other Nighthaunt armies. And so that's honestly all there really is when it comes to like the actual lore details. I kind of want to move into why is this cool, because conceptually I think they're cooler than the actual facts, right? Saying that you're liquid metal and not ethereal is probably the most crazy thing from a surface level that's about them. But one thing I love about the Quicksilver Dead is, of course, one, they appeared in a part of Age of Sigmar history that I really personally liked. I liked Chamon as a setting quite a bit. But also, they were a naturally occurring thing. And I liked the idea that these things were happening all over the place. That an entire city, if enough energy, enough attention was brought there, that like the echoes of terrible things done in the past is enough to kind of raise up the dead. You don't belong here. Like, we were killed viciously. This is our place now. And I wish there were more stories like that. Just, I don't know. As much as I like the idea of Nagash kind of being the Lord of Undeath, and I really do appreciate his character, flaws and all, I do often think like, man, I wish there was just a little bit more of a nudge to players in these specific battle tomes to form armies that are just unaligned with him. Maybe not against Nagash, but certainly like this, operate as free agents. Give me some of that. Because the whole like Nagash is all is Nagash thing is really cool when Nagash is the main character, but when he's sidelined for, say, Chaos and Be'lakor and all those other guys to shine, it just kind of seems like it gets a little bit dull unless there's other kingdoms doing their own thing. And this story was really fun when it came out because it gave us this idea of what was lost in the Age of Myth. So Age of Myth is here, this place is hopping, right? Elixir is a massive industry town in Chamon that's researching metallurgy as both a science and a magic. I mean, of course, it's the realm of metal. All these really cool innovations are happening. This is where the KO are born, the Keragen Overlords, I apologize. And it just seems so fun. And we don't often get glimpses into the Age of Myth, right? We have the world that was, meaning Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and then we have things going on now of like established cities and holds and scattered territories that are being assaulted by chaos. But there was that little tiny bit of time in the Age of Myth where we get such rare glimpses as to what everyday life was like. These were people who existed, had their own world, their own industry, their own stories, and it was a thread that was cut short. And I like learning about those stories. It makes the world Age of Sigmar feel like it has a history that is not Warhammer Fantasy Battles, which is technically true. It just doesn't always seem that way. So, I like those instances. I would like to hear your thoughts about the Quicksilver Dead. I don't know anything about them on the table, like as far as playing them. I do like Banshees as a concept of just screaming at people until they die from it. It's a very fun idea. I think this could be a very cool army, and I would love to see it on the table. So, if you have any ideas, let me know. I feel like going over and getting some Turbo Dork paints would be the best way to do this. Just lead belch your Turbo Dork and you're good to go. But I'd like to hear your thoughts or how you painted yours. So let me know in the comments down below and I will check you out there. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I will catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the Forests of Kindling, ripe for a fire in the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Pygeists in the new Warcry set Pyre and Floods, which Games Workshop was kind enough to send to me. Now, I recently did a video on the Lumineth Realm Lords that come in this set, the Idrillin River Blades, and I wanted to do a follow-up discussion here to talk about the Pygeists, one of the newest units to dawn for the Nighthaunt, which I'm very excited for. On the surface, these seem very simple, like Flamethrower Nighthaunt, which honestly it's a pretty good selling point for me already. But of course, since Nagash is involved, there's always a bit more going on under the hood than first glimpse. And so we're going to talk all about the Pygeist, their role in the army, what makes them special, unique, the kind of missions that they're sent on, and how they ended up in the Gnarlwood in this particular set for Warcry. Now, before getting into that, really quick, if you are interested in this video and you like any AOS or hobby supplies, please consider using any of the links in my link tree just down below. You'll see all the money you save on each one of those, and every time you use one of those links, it throws a tip in my tip jar, and it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I could not be more thankful. And if you're looking to learn more about Warcry or how these guys are going to fit into Nighthaunt going into 4th edition, be sure to check out Goonhammer for a bunch of cool tactics and how-to videos. For those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or the faction, the Nighthaunt were the big bad of 2.0. Mostly spawned from the Necroquake Nagash had cast, a new army of spirits and geists and haunts began to roam the realms. Now, they were initially spawned everywhere with kind of a lack of control. Nagash's spell didn't go quite the way it was supposed to, but they were later forged into a much more focused army under the rule of the newest Mortarch, Lady Olander, at least newest at the time. And if you want to see this army in action, I cannot recommend go read Soul Wars. It's one of my favorite books for the Age of Sigmar universe, and the Wrath of the Everchosen campaign book is another absolute banger with a great fight scene of the Nighthaunt. And the reason I point these books out is because when you are on the receiving end of fighting them, the way that it's described is like terrifying. There's like screaming forces of nature, like whole walls flying in the sky coming at you of just faces and claws. It disorients, they demoralize, and they murder with ease. And so I kind of wanted you to have that headspace as we talk about adding a new unit into that kind of insanity. Because there's a lot more going on here than if you've seen my, Nighthaunt series. These are not just generic Casper ghosts that just rush at people. In fact, what form any particular Nighthaunt unit takes is largely decided by Nagash himself. See, he sees himself as the ruler of the underworlds, the only one fit to dole out eternal punishments, for he has seen the sins of the realms kind of a thing. But here's the truth. Nagash is a very practical guy. I don't have or want the real estate to have these guys just get tortured 24/7, and then also have to worry about an army, and so what does he do? He doubles up. Everyone's a twofer. They're all serving an eternal punishment while dishing out punishment as part of Nagash's army. They are forced to do terrible things. And a perfect example of this is our subject today, the Pygeists. You see, in life, these were the wise men, the priests, and the healers who sought to ease the pain of death by providing comfort and care to the corpses of the recently deceased. Essentially, they'd have some blessing, benediction, or ritual rite over the body, which would functionally make it so that necromancers couldn't use the corpse or repurpose the animating spirit of the soul. And then they would burn the body. And this makes perfect sense if you live in, say, Shyish. You don't want a wind of death magic to blow over your village, and then all the dead people are up from the ground uncontrolled by a necromancer, right? That animating spirit just kind of fills them. This essentially puts a lock on the body so that no one can touch its body or soul, and then we can dispose of it in a respectful manner. In a sense, it's like a religious practice that will guarantee peace after death, which, in a setting with actual necromancers, would probably be quite nice. But of course, Nagash, the great necromancer, sees this as, an incomprehensible crime. In his mind, it's the natural order for people to die and their souls to come directly to him, and that's how it should be in his mind. To do these rituals is to deny souls and bodies that belong to the great necromancer. These are soul thieves, one and all. Even if they're not stealing the souls for themselves, they're denying it to Nagash. And since there is no greater crime, it follows that there should be no greater punishment. These Pygeists, as they're now called, now exist to do what they did before, burn stuff, but where once it was in service to the mortals of a community or town, now they burn stuff for Nagash. Their forms are compelled to ignite bale fires across the realms, burning enemies and searing the souls of their victims in eternal flames. And behind the eyes of a pyrograst is the soul of that good person being forced to enact the very thing that they fought in life against. They retain just enough vision and sentience to know how bad they are being. So burning things is the base function. But how does that serve Nagash outside of just being a weapon, right? Making someone do something they don't want to do for an eternity is one thing, but how does that fit into the greater Nighthaunt army? Well, these figures also tend to the bale flame beacons that litter Shyish, and these are actually the first time I've really heard this mentioned is in this little booklet that comes in Pyre and Flood that I actually really like the idea from. Essentially, all across Shyish, there are these big pillars of green fire. They show up in the artwork sometimes, and they're sort of like lighthouse keepers for those big pyres. They constantly go out, burn a bunch of enemies, collect souls that they've destroyed in combat, and then they dump them into the beacon. The purpose of doing this is that these beacons act like little satellites of necromancy for Nagash. This is a great way to kind of extend his will and power even further, because they do a few things. One, it sets up kind of like a relay for Shyish. If an army is coming, these beacons can be used to alert each other like in the old days, right? When fires would go from a tower and it would kind of alert the next tower and so on. So that's a very practical thing, but it also allows armies to literally be quickly raised. Since there's a well of souls and undead right there at the point of the pyre, and the pyre is built into a defensible position, you just need a necromancer there to literally put the pieces together. You have the well of power, you have the bodies, you raise them, and you have an immediate defense that you didn't have to worry about stationing troops around for. If somebody attacks, like say a Cities of Sigmar army, attacks someplace in Shyish, they have to hit this formidable defense, and if you're the Nighthaunt side, you can just keep falling back to the next pyre, and whatever invading force has to contend with waves upon waves of defenders that they were not anticipating, and that can respond rapidly. Hit them in the flanks, everything. All this to say, in a defensive kind of way, they can bleed an enemy army dry just for trying. That's what happens when they store all this power and bodies up in singular places, like these balefire pyres. It kind of gives me the sense of like Napoleon's going through Russia, where it's just like they're being harried and harassed by the elements, by armies all around them, by wild animals. Everything just makes that linear trip devastatingly hard to where it always seems to sputter out, right? You can't really quite get to the finish line. That's how they function, at least on a defensive aspect in Shyish. And if you're watching this video because you grabbed that Warcry, Pyre and Flood box, I think because of all this, they make a great counter to the Lumineth Realm Lords in there, right? That warband is a collection of individual hero-level killers. But this is about function, a function which is carried out so efficiently that it incorporates the eternal punishments of its perpetrators. So it feels like it revolves more around a single character with a job to do. And what's more, while they do have this function of defending the perimeter, neither Nagash nor Lady Olander is content to just let them play guard duty. It's a great punishment for failure, but on the whole, these guys have a job to do and they can really do a lot of work up front. And so how do we use them on the offense? And the battle plan, in so much as Lady Olander generally has one, which is to say, kinda hand-wavy, is you use the Pygeists as an effective flanking force or a solo force to cause massive mayhem. In game terms, for you and I, we would call this the Nighthaunt Distraction Carnifex. These forces, the Pygeists, mean relatively little to the undead, right? They can rebuild them. And it's very self-sufficient. You incinerate enemies, collect souls, which then you can use to heal, repair, instill, defend, whatever you need them for, and just continue on their own. They don't need supplies. They don't need to fall back to anything. So they have nothing to lose and are worth very little. But say, for the Cities of Sigmar, you just cannot afford to let any undead pyromaniacs loose and free around your city. If the main army is to the east, and these guys come from the west, and they burn all of your crops, your towns, your granaries. It doesn't really matter if they're a whole army. They have to be stopped for the sake of the stability of the entire region. You don't need to destroy a realm gate if you just douse it in so much fire that it's impassable. Same goes for any kind of major thoroughfare. And that's the kind of the tactic that they bring along with them, is that they're cheap and replaceable, but they represent such a catastrophic amount of damage and madness to the enemy that they cannot be ignored. And so these little pockets of Pygeists are sent out far and wide, essentially to burn the realms and scour it of life. Collect all the souls that you can along the way for Nagash, set up pyres as you have too many to carry, I guess. And you're going to meet up with bigger elements, Nighthaunt armies, as it were, as you're needed. So I kind of like that they're built in with this idea of sort of being solo, not needing a whole lot of support, but fitting very well into the way Nighthaunt operate. And all of that brings us to why they are here in the Gnarlwood. This is a Warcry warband after all, and the simple answer is they saw a giant box of kindling and they wanted to set it on fire. Right, this group wandered into Gur. They saw the Gnarlwood Forest as a great spot to cement some of those balefire towers, and to purge this region of Gur of life would be a great honor to present to Nagash. Look how much stuff we killed, right? All the trees, all the wildlife, everything, you scour it. Think of how many dead bodies are at the bottom of the Gnarlwood just from your games alone. How many dead people have you left and or lost in these games? All of those souls and corpses are Nagash's if the balefire levels the woods. And so that's the mission. They even moved in and began this massive undertaking. Again, it's like a continent-sized forest, and so they have a whole plan of doing it. They're going to establish a base head and then go light up some key parts of the forest to get the thing going en masse, have a few rituals to really kind of bring those fires together into one uber fire, and annihilate the forest in sections, essentially. They congregate in a region known as the Scorched Valley of the Gnarlwood, and they send out patrols to ignite the region piece by piece in sort of a pattern. Now, at the end of all my videos, I want to step back and say, why are these guys cool? What do they add to Nighthaunt as a whole? Sometimes it feels like Warcry warbands are kind of a meh addition to a faction, and sometimes it feels like they just truly lock in. And when I first looked at these models, I like them for sure. I mean, I like the poses, the Nighthaunt just look awesome, but I was unclear about what they really added to them as a faction. They have a lot of ghost boys, so these ones are toasty, who cares? But this warband touched on a few of the storytelling elements that I really like. One is the idea of punishment being turned into something functional. We see this with the Mirrormorn Banshees and the Jailers, Nagash taking a perceived offense and forcing you to do the opposite for eternity in recompense. And there's 3 sentences of lore here for each of the warriors in this band. I didn't cover it in the Lumineth Realm Lord band because frankly they all sounded the same. But an interesting thing here is that the boss is called the Deacon of Flames. Below him are the Balefire Guard, the Flame Wraiths, and bottom row is the Torch Wraiths. All of these various fighters are different because they served different roles in the mortuary cults in life. All those things that really ticked off Nagash, he basically mirrored their religious service duties in Afterlife. And as such, their punishments are tiered. So the actual performer of the rite is the Deacon of Flames, but even the guys who casually lit candles to keep him working into the night are punished as Torch Wraiths, just the most minute of little guys. So having a warband that essentially copy-pastes the responsibility structure of a church and twisting that into a murder gang is both awesome and decidedly Nagash. Undead and functional. The other aspect here is the unique goal that they bring to Gnarlwood. They don't want it, they want to burn it. There are no secrets or artifacts that they're hunting. They're not looking for some bonus to bring back to their boss. And this puts them directly at odds with just about every other warband that we've seen go into this place, but not to mention the Lumineth Realm Lords. Because they want to set everything on fire and the Lumineth want to open the river, which would then soak and cool everything. I assume their goal is to kind of leave it in ash and the roots would probably stay alive underground, but then it would collapse inward and the river would stay closed. And I like this because coming at things with a different motivation makes the story so fascinating, because they can ebb and flow from an unlikely ally to an uber threat that me and other warbands need to stop. So if you're a Chaos warband and there's a Gitz warband in front of you, and you both want the treasure that's in the Gnarlwood, and a third party comes up and just wants to level the entire thing on a most practical level, you have a reason to at least prioritize someone else. Maybe not work together, but maybe overlook them a little bit. My point is motivations. Why do they do what they do? Why are these factions fighting? Why are they contained in this singular place? Make them interesting to me. But friends, those are just my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours. What do you think of the new Pygeists and how they fit into the Illumineth? I don't know anything about their AOS 4.0 rules. I don't know a single thing, but I'm so curious to see how they articulate flamethrower ideas, right? Because that's just kind of what this section of the book is wreathed in, if you'll pardon me. It's just flamethrowers. That's the idea. Everything's fire themed for the Nighthaunt, and I like it. It's really cool. I just want to see how it's worded rules-wise. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends. Welcome, Wargamers, to the haunted streets of Har Kuron, because today we are taking a look at that little lore packet that came in Games Workshop's newest battle set. I don't really know what else to call it. Arena of Shades. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, every once in a while, Games Workshop will release these like army boxes where it's like 2 factions. Usually there's just a unique hero for each side, and typically they're in support of battle tomes that are about to be dropped. In this case, the Nighthaunt versus the Daughters of Cain. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending me one in advance. I don't play either of these armies, but I really wanted, first of all, the little mini rulebook that comes with it, as well as the lore packet, which we're going to be talking about today. I do have a sister video to this one, kind of unboxing it and just kind of going through what the contents are, but to be perfectly honest, unboxing videos I think are pretty boring, so let's talk about some story. Our story begins, much like many Age of Sigmar stories begin, with Nagash sitting and brooding, Nagash being the god of undeath in this setting. And nothing puts, a sour face on him more than people stealing the souls that are rightfully his. And there's a lot of ways that happens in the Age of Sigmar setting, whether it's the souls from the old world that the elven gods pull out of Slaanesh to form their children and redo, essentially, the elven race. It could be Sigmar himself taking the best and the brightest heroes from amongst the realms and forging them into Stormcast Eternals. Or the Idoneth Deepkin, who go around as pirates coming up from the shore, harvesting a bunch of souls, bringing them home to kind of sustain their young, and therefore perpetuate their race. There are, of course, other factions that have reasons to mess with souls, but what I'm getting at is there's a lot of people who Nagash has on his list. Soul thieves is what he calls them. And he decides, you know what, let's do something about this. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that this story, I feel, does a great job of putting Nagash in the context of the current timeline. If you're not familiar, the Broken Realms campaign series, which just finished the tail end of last year, saw Nagash get laid low by Teclis and a few other people from his realm. That was in the book Broken Realms Teclis. Essentially, after the Necroquake, all this stuff, Teclis was like, we're going to put Nagash in his place, so it was the ultimate battle of the nerds. Teclis, kind of the god of light and hish, and very magic-focused, as well as Nagash, god of undeath, also super magic-focused. Went toe-to-toe in hish, and ultimately, Nagash was struck down. Now, at the end of that story, it was a little bit unclear, like, well, what actually happened to Nagash? Because the last time we saw him get struck down, it was right at the brink of the Age of Chaos, and he was just out of the story for hundreds of years. So it's like, well, is he like gone? Like, what's he doing? Well, this story gives us some insight. No, he was not knocked out in the same way as when Archaon took him out, for example, in the Age of Chaos. Instead, he's just in a severely weakened state. The kind of quake that came out of Shyish that kind of put death magic all over the place has been largely reversed by Alariel, which took place at the beginning of Broken Realms Kragnos. And so he's still the god of death, but his power is now much more contained. It's limited to Shyish, or wherever he decides to go personally. But it does emphasize he is weakened. And in this weakened state, he gets very, shall we say, grouchy. And grouchy people want to get revenge on those who have wronged them. In this case, he wants to go soul thief hunting. So we're going to put a pause. That's the Nagash side of the story. We're going to look over at other events that happened during the Broken Realms series. At the top of the campaign, Morathi caused what is essentially a civil war in the city of Anvilgard, took it over, made it a Daughters of Cain like hub, and called it Har Huron. A crazy, awesome story that saw everything from cogforts going wild and trying to attack all kinds of elves, a Stormkeep taken without a single Stormcast being killed so that they wouldn't alert Sigmar. Like just ridiculous things that were really fun to read. And with this, Morathi asserted herself as, first of all, a deity-level character, which she now is, and the sole owner and defender of Har Huron, her new home that she has carved out of the realms. Well, in that story, to achieve that, she got the help of the Idnith Deepkin. They were all part of her plan. She needed an artifact from the Deepkin, she went in and stole it. They went to go bring her to task, thinking she was an enemy, like trying to steal from them, and instead she hands them back the artifact and makes them an offer. Work for me, I'll give you all the souls that you can handle. This then allows her to go move and take over Har Huron, now that she is super powerful and has some good allies. Okay, unpause. Nagash is sitting there thinking about the world's events that have happened as of recent and what things he has the ability to affect. He's too weak to go toe-to-toe with Teclis again, of course. Most of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are out crusading, but it was a good thing that he unleashed them. His power has receded back to Shyish, and there's not a ton of order settlements there. There's a few, but not a ton. But one thing gets him stewing. It is this idea that souls were used as payment for Morathi to take the city of Anvilgard. That is to say, it is the idea that elves are so haughty as to think that the resource that belongs to him and only him can be used for an exchange of goods and services. It's like, no. Those are mine. And so the question becomes, how do we get retribution? Well, he doesn't know where the elves are of the Deepkin. They're just scattered all across the oceans in the hidden depths. He found one enclave in Shyish only because the Skaven accidentally drained an ocean. True story, it was amazing, I love it. But he can't find them, but hey, he does know where Har Huron is. It's in Akshi. He knows how to get there, and he wants to get a revenge, right? He wants to do something to prove to them, this is not a currency that you can use. These are mine, and they matter when it comes to souls. And so, Nagash pulls out his Rolodex of all the heroes that he knows, and he starts flipping through. Now here's the issue. He doesn't want to send the Mortarchs, which are his most powerful and loyal servants, right? You got Lady Olander, Catacros is busy in the 8 points, Neferata, Manfred, Arcan the Black, doesn't want to send any of them. Specifically, because he doesn't want them to know that he is weakened. Like, to bring them into this plan would require him to be like, I need you to go because I can't on some level. Or, if he wanted to dominate their minds to control them, which he can do, we learned that in the Rumgate Wars, he can, like, basically take over the mind of Manfred or Neferata if he wants to. Well, he can't do that outside of Shyish at the moment. So, where does he find a warrior who would do things for him without question, but then also have the knowledge of, this is not the time to try and usurp Nagash? Who could that be? And so, like I said, going through his little Rolodex, he finds one. It is Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King. A character we covered in depth during my Nighthaunt lore. You can go ahead and check that out. But essentially, he is a dangerous, treacherous betrayer of a man who only seeks the power of the throne for himself. He's a crummy dude, a politicker. He does all these kinds of things. And so Nagash is actually pretty okay with that. He's like, I'm super into that vibe. But the problem is, in life, Kurdos worshipped Sigmar. And so his eternal punishment was to serve Nagash instead of Sigmar, and to be married to the ruler, meaning Lady Olander, and never get to rule himself. It's this eternal thing where he's constantly like right at the cusp of getting everything he ever wanted, being in charge, being a king, but he'll never, ever actually achieve it, which is just mean. And so he summons Kurdos Valentian and basically offers him this chance. Now, On the flip side, looking from Kurdos's perspective, he's getting called out of the bullpen, right? This is his moment. Nagash has given me an opportunity, and he's a character who doesn't give opportunities frequently to impress him. He's given me a mission. I need to go out there. I need to go take Harcuron and have the deeds of my, my might and my trustworthiness relayed to Nagash so that I can increase my position. Again, in Afterlife, he is just as conniving and kind of like social climby as much as he possibly can. I mean, and to be fair, Nagash is betting on this because it means he's going to do a good job or he's going to be punished and he knows the stakes. So it's actually a good deal for both of them. And actually, I really like that as an idea of like why Nagash would bother with this like secondary level of command of the Nighthaunt. It's like, because this guy is looking for an opportunity to improve his station, and that's exactly what Nagash needs. Someone who's not already on the level to question him, but just right below that, where you're super strong and super capable, but not quite enough to be a problem, I mean. And so, that is the mission. Send Kurdos Valentian and his own procession over there to Harcuron and reap a toll. Now, what's interesting to point out here is that there's not actually a conquest plan in place. Like, Kurdos is not going to take the city. He doesn't care about it. Nagash doesn't need more real estate. He's already got a whole realm. Instead, the idea is you're going to reclaim the souls that were paid to the Idoneth, meaning nobody got out of this for free. We're going to take our due. I can't find the Idoneth Deepkin, but, let's say you paid them 1,000 souls. I'm going to take 1,000 souls from Harcuron. You know what? Forget it. Make it 2,000. We're going to, have the taxes paid too. And that's an interesting, I guess, kind of setup for battle, because the idea is like he doesn't want to claim anything. They're not trying to hold anything. It makes their objectives very different when one side wants to defend the city they own and the other just wants to kill everybody. Does not care in the least about the city. And so, Kurdos comes up with what he believes is a cunning plan. Since Anvilgard fell and Harcuron was erected, meaning the city changed hands from Sigmar to Morathi, the Daughters of Cain have built their favorite thing, which is several gladiatorial pits. Because the Daughters of Cain's whole life is built upon combat prowess and agility and stuff, their entertainment is watching people fight in the arena, fighting in the arena themselves, or sharpening their skills in combat by practicing in the arena. Like, it's just a big deal. The rest of Harcuron, meaning there's still human remnants, there's still all kinds of elves that aren't Daughters of Cain, well, they just have fun watching, betting, all this kinds of stuff. Like, it's a very, seedy underbelly kind of a city, and Bloodsport just kind of plays into that. And so Kurdos's plan is, wait until they have this really big gladiatorial event going on, and then we'll attack basically from under the city, do a little sneaky ghost attack, and essentially kind of take as many souls as you can while the place is undefended, unready, and you're not even going to have to go into the major hubs that are the arenas, right? Leave them concentrated, full of people, kill everybody else, because again, you're not trying to take anything. It's not like you're going to besiege the gladiatorial arena. You don't care about it. And then, once the Daughters of Cain understand what's happening and they start trickling out of the gladiatorial pits, boom, you can ambush them, knowing that you've pretty much killed a bunch of the civilians already. Which, to be honest, is not a bad plan. Wait until everyone's distracted, get into a good position, and then snap the trap. Like, that makes perfect sense. And so, one particular night when the gladiatorial pits were in full swing, we're introduced to a named character who is a gladiatrix, I should say. That's sort of the new hero you get for the Daughters of Cain. She's in there in the pit, just fighting off all kinds of monsters. And all of a sudden, a weird fog starts to descend upon the city. All of the graves start to tremble. Anything that has chains or hourglasses begins to shake or erupt violently. Anyone who practices any form of death magic, all of a sudden their magic gets amplified and they might accidentally set themselves on fire or something. It's just weird stuff starts going down, and the Nighthaunt start creeping up from underneath the city. So you have Kurdos Valentian. He has his little honor guard of the new Nighthaunt with crossbows, just to kind of act as a last shield buffer so no one gets to him. But you also have a new unit called the Scriptor Mortis. Now, this guy, to be very simple, his job is to record things and relay them to Nagash. Essentially, he's writing the epic book of deeds on how Nagash changed the realms from this terrible place into this beautiful necrotopia. Like, he's like literally a remembrancer of history. It's just the history that he's currently writing of turning the whole place into an undead nightmare. Well, Kurdos needs somebody who can relay to Nagash how great Kurdos is, because he wants to, again, use this to social climb, get up to that next tier of power and influence. And it wouldn't do for, him to win the battle, but no one to talk about it or remember it. So he brings one of these Scriptor Mortis guys. He's like, listen, you're going to be in charge of a small contingent. You can do whatever you like, but all of your reports need to focus on the fact that Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King, was the one who made this possible. I mean, the Scriptor Mortis is like, I'll record what actually happens, and if we win, you get credit because you did it. And that, I'm going to pause there because that's kind of where the actual story elements end. Because, again, this is a set of missions that come with a box that's trying to tell a very specific story, and it lets you as the players tell that story. That's why the main hero is the Scriptor Mortis. We have the Blade Guys Revenants, Miramorn Banshees, like all the cool things from Nighthaunt. Basically, it's a small detachment. Well, I should say the contents of this box represent a small detachment of the Nighthaunt army and a specific, set of Daughters of Cain that kind of cobbled together as everything was going crazy. Because I was reading the lore and I was like, well, if Kurdos is in charge of everything, why isn't he in this box? But the truth is, it's a massive war front, and this box specifically focuses on the contingent that is with the Scriptor Mortis. Now, the bits that we do get that are canon, from the little flavor text that come before each mission, it's made very clear that the initial Nighthaunt assault is very effective. They are just absolutely raking in souls. The Spirit Torments are there just like going full Kirby, just sucking everything in around them. There's all kinds of mayhem and mischief. There's residents from buildings who are just hurling anything that they have in their homes at the Nighthaunt, trying to fight back in some way. However, things don't go perfectly for the Nighthaunt. Phase 1 of the plan of surprise them when everyone's in the arena totally works. The thing that kind of backfires, though, is that the Daughters of Cain realize that something is wrong and start pouring into the streets a little bit faster than what Kurdos and the Scriptor Mortis were expecting. So they thought they were going to have all this time, to reap this tally of souls from the civilians, and the truth is they didn't get nearly as much time as they were anticipating. Now, we know from the missions that one of the gladiatrix who was fighting in the pit, that's the new hero we get for the Daughters of Cain, she goes out and leads a small group trying to pick the best fights that they can. Kind of a cut the head off the snake kind of scenario. At some point, they end up fighting underground, and the actual second mission for this box set has them fighting in an underground cavern, and I thought it was really cool because there's rules for Nighthaunt not being able to go through things or fly over particular items, command abilities that allow you to pass through them. It's a very unique dynamic to it. But it's an underground fight, and then the last battle has no resolution because you and I, as players, are trying to resolve it. And that's it for the story, but I'll tell you what, let's talk about why this is cool and kind of what I think the resolution we can walk away from is. So as far as what I think actually happens after this box set, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Kurdos Valentian, he took a minor victory. Let's call it that. Let's call it a minor victory. We'll use game terms. In that he was sent to take a whole bunch of souls, and it was very well established that he did that indeed. He did do an immense amount of damage. I'm sure Nagash would have wanted to see the entire city run down, but that's a tall ask. If you're not going to bring in any heavy hitters like the Mortarks or the Ossiarch Bone Reapers or anything like that. So if his mission was just to go cause mayhem and take a bunch of souls home, good, mission accomplished, we got him. For the Daughters of Cain, I have no doubt that Har Huron stands, right? It's a huge centerpiece of narrative, and it's a really important one too. So I just feel there's no way that they already knocked that off the, chopping block. If Morathi just took the city, she's not going to lose it in a box set that's limited release. But that being said, as these stories can build off of one another, it could be very important and relevant that the city has been depleted of a lot of its civilian population. Because that matters a lot. When you think about, it used to be Anvilgard, a place where many, many people, average folks, fishermen, all that stuff lived. Yes, a lot of them were shady. There was an immense amount of crime. but it was still a city because it had citizenry. Well, what happens if you just remove a massive population? Well, the pie chart of how much of your place is militaristic versus residential changes dramatically. And so I could easily see Huron, getting to my point, becoming a much more of a deep fortification and military state rather than a city that also facilitates the Daughters of Cain quite a bit. And the reason I think, I give Kurdos the minor victory is that I don't think he would be punished for achieving the goal being get some souls. I just also don't think that Nagash was necessarily dazzled enough to do anything positive for him. I improve his station whatsoever. I asked for a thing, you did the thing good, you did the thing I asked, you are at or near expectation. Now, as far as why is the story cool, well, it's cool because when you read it, there are like little nods to what happened in the Broken Realm series. Like they mention a busted up cog fort outside the city. Well, that was a huge centerpiece thing during the actual campaign. Or broken down buildings and specific bars, like all of those things were name dropped during the Broken Realm series. So it was nice. It kind of felt very firmly in Huron, which is awesome. I liked Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King, having some meaning to himself. Like, for the longest time, when the first Nighthaunt book dropped, there was a lot of named characters, but not a lot of character behind them, if you know what I mean. Like, they were like, oh yeah, this person is super evil and super bad. Okay, well, by the time you get to the fourth character and or unit that says, this guy's the meanest and the baddest, you stop caring. You become a little numb. But when you instead pluck out named characters and give them a purpose, like Nagash, the god of death, rings your phone and is like, bruh, I need you. That's a story. That's where I get to see Kurdos try his best. And he did. He set up a little trap. He underestimated his enemy, but I feel like the other Mortarchs have done that or worse. And overall, he proved himself to be exactly what he is, which is an effective tool for Nagash. So anytime a little bit of story is added to these named characters, just to give them a little bit more of something to do, so we're not just constantly being spoon-fed, he's the evilest, he's the meanest, he's the angriest, I'm here for it. And also it lets us see what Huron has become. It's still a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but now they've erected all these kinds of arenas and blood pits, and it's become much more of a spectacle. And the place has changed. Honestly, I would really love to see like supplements come for Soulbound, the AOS role-playing game by Cubicle 7, that's what it is. But yeah, I would love those things because it's such a fascinating idea to me. That city alone, just what it's been through since the beginning of Age of Sigmar, makes it very like fertile ground for cool storytelling. I just don't think that that's been fully reached yet. It was great to see in Broken Realms Ragnars, but I'm talking specifically about Huron. Like after those events, I would love to see what the city looks like. We have some idea because there is an Anvil Guard thing for Soulbound, like I mentioned, but again, that's all pre, Civil War / taking over by Morathi. So getting a sense of how it's changed is what I'm getting at. All in all, for being just a small little couple of paragraphs that blurb into new units, I thought it was a fun little read. Is it enough to make a Black Library novel off of? Maybe if you had some strong character writing, but the plot overall is not what I would call like riveting. But it gives us some great insights into what's going on with a character that doesn't get a whole lot of love, Kurdos, and a city that was just recently the center of a lot of narrative action, and we get a glimpse as to how it's doing, meaning Huron. And if that was all it's trying to do, which I think it is, mission accomplished. So let me ask you this, friends. Are you going to be grabbing the Arena of Shades box? If so, which faction are you excited about? Let me know in the comments down below. I will respond to you there. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I cannot wait to talk to you next time. Happy wargaming. In yesterday's video, we met Lady Ollander, the Veiled Lady, and her miserable husband, the Craven King, appointed by Nagash to forge an army from the rabble of spirits formed by the Necroquake. She created structure, order, and a chain of command. But as her processions grew larger and larger, she realized she needed more leaders underneath her. But who could she possibly pick to lead such a pitiful host of souls? In today's video, we'll be covering the Knight of Shrouds, their officers, the Dreadblade harrows, and also bring in Reikenor the grimhailer as an important character. Now, as we begin talking about the Knight of Shrouds, we need to understand and remember Nagash's plan and design for the Nighthaunts. This is a vanguard force meant to impose fear in the mortal realms. and to be the will of Nagash made manifest. Up to this point, Nagash has understood that beings use fear, but he, with this faction, has decided to make that a weapon. And so the Knight of Shrouds are going to play into that. During the Age of Myth, all the way to the present, Nagash has been rooting out societies in Shyish that oppose him. Not everyone universally recognizes and worships Nagash. Some were barbarian kings, mighty generals, and high lords of societies. And one by one he went through and tore their kingdoms down. And that eventual grinding out of resistance, it didn't just destroy armies and topple regimes, it saw other leaders who saw maybe an allied kingdom that also did not worship Nagash, they just started to mentally break. In their desperation for survival, they would pledge allegiance to Nagash. However, once you set yourself against the god of the undead, it takes more than a vocal promise of loyalty to gain his trust and his favor. You need to make a sacrifice. And so these leaders, these generals, these high lords would betray their own people in exchange for immortality and power. And they would do this in a variety of ways. They would send their armies into unwinnable wars specifically to offer up the bodies of their people. Nagash would kill them, smash the army, and then raise them all back to be more undead. So he would bolster Nagash's forces by betraying his own folk. They would let undead into the city and let their people be devoured from the inside out. And in return for these grievous and terrible deeds, Nagash granted them a small sliver of his power and, of course, immortality. Now, as we've mentioned in all these videos, Nagash still imposes his justice and his will on his leaders just like he does on the rabble, the basic troops, and the Knight of Shrouds are no different. They live in this perpetual torment, constantly feeling regret for the actions that brought them where they are. The only escape or reprieve that they get is when they bury themselves in their work, which of course is leading Nighthaunt, killing anyone who's alive, really just doing the will of Nagash. And as such, they have become betrayal made manifest. When people look at a Knight of Shrouds, there's no respect for them as the mighty general they were in life. This is a despicable character, but the undead have no choice but to follow his commands. And raising up all these great and mighty in terms of their battle prowess heroes has given Nagash a chance to have a great cadre of lieutenants, generals, sergeants, leaders of men to pull from. They're all loyal to him. They're bound to his will for eternity, trapped in a hellish prison of self-loathing, and their only reprieve is to do the dark will of Nagash himself. Some go to war riding on ghostly steeds, some hover over ground as if they were on foot. It doesn't really matter. All of them are great at combat. Their true strength, however, is their ability to marshal the armies. As we mentioned in other videos, when the Nighthaunt first came out of the Necroquake, they were kind of a mindless rabble, just seizing targets of opportunity but not having a cohesive force. This is the glue that binds. They will send certain units out and flank each other, get into the enemy right where it hurts, strike down leaders of importance, those kinds of things. Really, your leaders and officers on the ground level are what make wars happen. And because of their immortal nature, the tactics of these war heroes is being refined through countless ages. They just keep getting better at what they're doing. Now, who are the Dreadblade harrows? Well, they kind of go hand in hand. For larger armies, a Knight of Shrouds is going to need more officers beneath him. As the forces get bigger, to keep his commands being issued in sync, he needs other people who can issue them to the various elements of a battle. It helps with coordinating larger assaults, and really just helps extend the Knight of Shrouds' will. And this fundamentally is what the Dreadblade harrows are. In life, they were the personal guard and counsel of the Knight of Shrouds, what would become a Knight of Shrouds. They watched the betrayal of their people happen and did nothing. They neither helped nor hindered it. They just stood by there and watched their leader sacrifice all their people. Their cowardice was to believe that their inaction would keep their souls from damnation. And as punishment, they are eternally bound to the leader who is now a Knight of Shrouds that betrayed them and their very people. They're forced to assist the horror that they choose not to stop in life. They were spineless in life, and now they are bound eternally to that icon of betrayal who is the Knight of Shrouds. In battle, they act as heralds, bodyguards, and ground officers in these great processions that Lady Allender has formed. If the Knight of Shrouds is leading the main force and he wants to have a flanking unit of cavalry like Hexrays, there's probably going to be a Dreadblade harrow leading that second flank. And that really sums up kind of what the structure of a Nighthaunt army is. You have Lady Allender on top as the Mortarch of Grief, various heroes as middle management, and then all of the spirits down beneath. It's a very slim organizational structure that allows for a lot of flexibility and really emphasizes the character and skill sets of the Knight of Shrouds that are leading these armies. Now transitioning, I wanted to have another character in here, Reikenor the grimhailer. He's not actually a Knight of Shrouds, but he's very similar in terms of appearance and somewhat battlefield role, so I wanted to include him somewhere in this week, and this really just seemed like the best place to do it. This is a character who rides a flying horse, much like a Pegasus as we would know in the real world. And Reikenor's origin story has largely been lost to time. We know that he was a sorcerer king who spent his life trying to cure death, to eradicate mortality. This makes me think that he had a kingdom that was largely based on magic and intellectual pursuits, so very intelligent, very wise, and his life's goal was to keep the sting of death away from his people. He was very knowledgeable in the magic of Haish, which is light, which really focuses on reason and purity, and he must have been making great strides in his field of study when it came to mortality. He drew in many students and acolytes from all the realms. People wanted to learn what he had learned and help him in his studies and receive that knowledge as well. However, the problem with fame is it also draws the darkness, so Nagash realized who this guy was and what he was doing. To put it very simply, he never found the cure for death. Let's just spoil that right there. In the afterlife, Nagash had yet another cruel and ironic punishment prepared. Reikenor, who had been a hunter of knowledge and secrets in life, well, he would continue his hunt, but now he would hunt anyone who dares to defy death and its magics. Which means he's hunting the very people who seek what he sought in life. His first task was to slay every student and acolyte of his. It was a bloodbath that erased all the research that his entire life was spent building. No one defies death. No one keeps their soul from Nagash. Now, to aid in his mission, he was given a flying steed to traverse the realms, the one we see in his model now. And it's important to note that this is not just good guys who are seeking to escape death, right? Most of the time when we talk about people, very noble folks trying to escape death, it's usually because they have a loved one, they're very honorable, and they want to make sure they don't lose someone who's valuable to them. But it's not just that. It's also necromancers who don't bow to Nagash. Anyone who thinks that they can own death magic without paying proper respects to the Lord of the Undead is an enemy of Nagash, because you're taking his power. And previously he had operated largely alone. Nagash would dispatch him throughout the realms to go and hunt these people and necromancers and scholars, and he would do so with a very swift justice. It almost reminds me of Karanak, the fleshhound of Khorne, who basically Khorne would send out to just hunt a specific target. Very similar sounding things. But after the Necroquake, Lady Ollander, when she brought in all the Nighthaunt, also called in Reikenor. And instead of him kind of being this lone force, he was put in charge of a procession. Now, he can actually go from one procession to another. Again, his main job is still hunting out these people who are trying to cheat death, so to speak. So he can hop around from procession to procession, but when he arrives at one, he is in charge. This makes him a pivotal figure when it comes to fighting Stormcast Eternals, if you are a Death Army, because they are the embodiment of what he's trying to fight. People who cheat death. Souls that don't go to Nagash. And while he's not necessarily hunting every Stormcast by name, they are likely the biggest affront to him in terms of a different faction. And since he's being put back in charge of processions, leading people, remember he was a king in his life, the Enforcer of Death has become a ruler of souls yet again. And friends, that is all there is to know about the Knight of Shrouds, the Dreadblade harrows, and Reikenor the grimhailer. Incredible models, some of the best that GW has put out. And I love that every single one of them has this reoccurring theme of Nagash's kind of twisted, ironic justice running through them. I absolutely love it. We have a lot more content coming up this week. Tomorrow we'll be diving into Spirit Torments and Wraith Captains. So if you like this video and you want to learn more about Nighthaunt or really any Age of Sigmar faction, go ahead, click subscribe, and tell me what you'd like to learn about in the comments down below. Lady Ollander is one of my favorite heroes in Grand Alliance Death. I covered her story back when I did the Nighthaunt Battle Tome, but in this last White Dwarf, December of 2019, even more light was shed upon her story as they have a section called the Tome Celestial, and it's all about something called the Emerald Host, the Mortarch of Grief's elite fighting force, and that share a terribly intertwined story with hers. And I really wanted to talk about it because when there are these cool lore segments in White Dwarfs, a lot of folks either they come in later in the hobby or they weren't able to get the White Dwarf when it was available, stuff like that. And I don't want that lore to be lost on us. So I wanted to talk about the Emerald Host. So to properly convey the story of this host, let's go back to their lives before Undeath. Back in the Age of Myth, in the screaming wastes of Shyish, there was a massive empire called Dolorum. It was ruled by a bloodline of proud and competent kings. They were, rather cold and somewhat merciless, but they served their kingdom of thousands faithfully. Good, dependable leaders. And this all changed when a young, attractive woman began quickly climbing through the social ladder within the parties and rumors of aristocracy. It was Lady Olinder. And soon she had captivated the heart of the young prince of this empire. Their marriage was announced to great anticipation, and plans for a wedding were put in motion. Now, on the eve before their union, tragedy struck the kingdom as both the king and the betrothed prince disappeared without a trace under very suspicious circumstances. One of which was that this left Lady Olinder as the sole heir, as the binding documents of their marriage were already signed and put in place. To kind of dissuade any real investigation and garner public support and positive opinion, she took on to large public displays of grief. Wearing her wedding veil across the city, she became known as the Mourning Bride. The truth being that under her veil, she had this huge grin. She did not care at all for the loss of life. And although we don't know how she managed to remove the king and prince, we get obviously the very strong implication that she had something to do with it, and she found the power and the riches and the lying to people about how sad she is intoxicating. And that's the story we've had for some time. That's my brief recap of what's in the Nighthaunt Battle Tome. But this White Dwarf article kind of pauses the story there and adds a little bit more info, and before the story continues to what we see when she dies. The important thing that is added is that not everyone is fooled by her act. That there was this network of political and military officials all seeing her meteoric rise to power and smelling something very fishy about it. They formed this secret fraternity set on deposing the queen and setting Dolorum, in their opinion, back on track. They all wore these emerald brooches of the Dolorum royal dynasty, a badge of honor bestowed on the greatest Dolorum heroes, and a symbol of the old rule that they wish to reestablish. And I like this addition. It adds a little bit of political intrigue, right? Someone does a grand rise to power, and all the fallout from that forms these little conspiring groups. It's the stuff that great stories are made of. But here's the problem. Lady Olinder is not a fool. She has eyes and ears throughout the empire and the castle. She pays beggars to give her information, as well as kind of leeching information from the higher-ups within her own empire. And it only takes one witness or snitch to see a coup like this collapse. And it just so happens that there was one person whose honor happened to be for sale. His name is Cherist Malcor. This gentleman was part of that aristocratic group. But where the others saw a problem to be unified around, meaning the problem being this lady who's not part of our empire is now ruling it somehow, he saw opportunity. And there's a character like this in every political drama, right? Timepiece, modern day political shows, whatever you want to do. There's always the guy who will do anything to win. So he goes to Lady Olinder with a proposition. I deliver the usurpers to you in exchange for wealth, power, and a bump up the societal ladder. And this was an egregious act of betrayal, not only to just the men and women of influence who he grew up with, but betrayal of the kingdom itself, because at this point now he's steering it further away from stopping the people who want to get it back on track, really. And that betrayal spawns from the fact that he knew Lady Olinder did something wrong, but he sold out his own kin to get ahead in life. And that treachery is going to cost him dearly. So in one night, Lady Olinder snapped the trap. Her personal guard swooped in, rounded up all of the would-be betrayers at one of their meetings, and either killed or threw them into terrible prisons forgotten to history. As for Malcor, her man on the inside, Lady Olinder killed him. Because he knew too much, right? This was a total cementing of her power base. Anyone who disagreed with her was dead or locked away, meaning they were just unable to communicate. And realistically, this is where the additional lore ends temporarily, right? It dips back into the known lore for Lady Ollander. She rules with an iron fist while preying on people's sympathy, faking deep sorrow and care. Nurgle sweeps into the area of Shyish, and her kingdom is consumed by disease, but she could not care less. For her death, when she does ultimately die, Nagash's fitting punishment is that she feels all the sorrow and grief that she faked her whole life, and eventually, when he's looking for someone to become the new Mortarch, raises and elevates her to being in charge of the Nighthaunt. Now, as we know of Nagash, his punishments are eternal, and often sort of ironic given the lives that led to them. And so it was that Lady Ollander was not done with those who conspired against her, and they have become her most vicious aspect in war. If there is a particular enemy that has offended or eluded Lady Ollander, she will place upon them the Emerald Curse. This is described as an extravagant hex spell, requires the energy of several souls and a sliver of the Mortarch herself, so it's not done easily or lightly. But for those marked with the Emerald Curse, death is a guarantee. Because the Emerald Curse is basically a summoning ritual and an assassination order into one. Back in the ruins of Dolorm, which is of course long dead empire by now, the restless dead stir. These ancient prisons and torture chambers that held the Dolorm royal dynasty begin to moan and wail. Those who sought the fall of Lady Ollander in life are now eternally her servants, forced to do her bidding. And these were the best and the brightest of Dolorm, and now they put those skills to brutal use in the afterlife. They arise collectively from their tombs and form their own procession. Basically they form their own Nighthaunt army. A lot of it's cavalry based. They ride out and hunt down whoever Lady Ollander targeted with the hex. Now at the lead of this procession is none other than Cherished Malkor, the great betrayer who Lady Ollander used to unravel a plot against her and then discarded like a piece of trash. Malkor has been made a Knight of Shrouds, a role given to those who betray their kith and kin. So what I liked about this is this cool instance of, normally it's like an empire, the example that we've seen before with Knight of Shrouds is it's like a king who sacrifices and betrays his own people to Nagash. Very big, grandiose things, but here's just a normal guy who's higher in society, but he just stabs some people in the back and he's given the same role. And I kind of like that. It's a much more relatable, understandable reason to be labeled as an eternal betrayer. And this is the life now of the Emerald Host. They sit in the ruins of Dolorm, trapped screaming in their prisons that they are in because they wanted to do the right thing by themselves and get rid of Lady Ollander. And now they spend their eternity in service to her. When she calls, meaning she puts the curse out, they have to answer, riding across the realms, hunting their prey, and fighting in her name. Now, again, there's not a ton of lore here, right? It's just adding in, hey, here's a really cool, example of what a Nighthaunt army could be like. But let's talk about why this is cool. The first one is I just love anytime they take a moment to expand on established lore. Little things like this, like the story of Lady Ollander is very straightforward, right? I mean, it's a lot of vagary, you know what I mean? How she rose to power and all the aristocracy stuff and how that kingdom worked. Not a lot of detail. It'd be a great short story or novel, something like that. But what you're doing here is just interjecting a little bit of intrigue, right? Now it's a little bit more interesting because not everyone's fooled. It makes it seem frankly, like a more believable kingdom, for lack of a better word. And it's just that little dose of drama I think makes it really interesting. It's the kind of thing that I think White Dwarf is perfect for. Just little injections of intrigue here and there with different stories. And I want to see more of it in the future. The big thing, though, about why I think this story is interesting is I love how Nagash makes his punishments work together. By that I mean, so you have a situation where Lady Ollander obviously is the main person being punished here, right? She is going to feel all of the grief and sadness in eternity of death that she never felt in her brief time alive. For all the people who tried to betray her, right, and tried to do some backstabbing, they now have to serve her. And Malkor, obviously, he was kind of a jerk in his life and he betrayed his friends and family. Now he is leading that procession who is then ultimately subject to Lady O. But at the same time, there's clear senses of hierarchy, right? No one has the willpower individually to say, I'm not going to serve that guy. And so their punishments are eternal and they're humiliating. However, they also work together. People take on the roles of very specific units, right? Like Malkor becoming a Knight of Shrouds is a specific military unit in the Nighthaunt army. And so their punishments have been woven together in such a way that they form a cohesive army, supporting one another, reinforcing one another, and achieving a goal. And that's always something I really liked about... It's in Allegiance of Nagash, but they really started looking at it when it was Nighthaunt and now Ossiarch Bone Reapers, of this idea of like taking bits of someone's personality based on their life and making it interlocking with your punishment, or serving Nagash in the best way possible. I've always thought those stories with these characters are very, very interesting. And if you ever read Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds, you get a glimpse of that with some of the undead heroes, quote unquote, from that book, where they're incredibly interesting characters because they were terrible people in life, or good people that Nagash just got ticked off at. And the crude nature of their punishments eternally is so interesting as a reflection of that. So that's all I wanted to add today. I thought it was a really cool little piece. I hope they do more like it in the future for other various armies and characters. If you want to see the rules for it, I believe you can get it digitally. But basically what they did was they just made two different battalions. One is Malkor and 2 Dreadblade harrows, like their little minor heroes on horseback. And then there's a battalion for cavalry. Again, it's really trying to focus on the fact that these are like the knights who would like ride chivalrously across the kingdom kind of thing, and then in the afterlife, now they're stuck hunting people for Lady Olander. I can't speak to how effective it is in the game, but hey, it is surely really, really cool. And again, if you wanted to learn more about the Nighthaunt, you can go check out my video series on them down below, and I have all the information there. Thank you all so much for watching. What kind of army would you like to see this kind of work done to next? For me personally, they've done like a few Storm hosts, I think. One that I would really love to see is Maggotkin. I want a little spread like this for something like the book what we see in Plague Garden, where there's like a royal holy monastic order centered around Nurgle, like the Order of the Fly, I believe is what it's called. Something like that. I would love to see these little bits of lore turned into kind of rules, but not necessarily, injected into the hobby. So tell me your thoughts down below, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, everybody.